So good morning to all of you. I hope that you are all feeling well, that you had a very good rest this night, and that you enjoyed the dinner last night. Thank you for those who organized the excellent dinner, especially us two. It was a very nice time together. So we have one more active and exciting day ahead of us, starting with the tax planning topic that Jens will kindly present. Thank you, Jens, for the great work that you have been doing, as well as all the working group. Today, we will, or the board is asked to consider the feedback that was received from the three global roundtables, virtual roundtables that were organized and held in April this year, and also the task force's preliminary views on the reactions and reactions to the roundtable feedback, to which the board members are asked to provide input and directions. Let me just, before giving the floor to Jens, say one or two words about this project. First, I'd like to highlight the importance, the great relevance of the topic and of the work that is being done. We are very much willing to see if it is possible until the end of the year, as agreed in March, to come up with some conclusions and some outputs for us to consider and for the others to consider mostly. The three roundtables were an important moment, not only for the development of the topic and of the work on tax planning, but also for IESBA, because it shows our commitment and the commitment of the board and the staff to engage with the external stakeholders all over the world. These three roundtables meant a lot of work from the staff and from the working group and effort. They were prepared in terms that they could suit different stakeholders around the world at different timings, so that they could be comfortable and have more incentive to participate, as we wanted to reach out to a great number of stakeholders. The fact is that, and correct me please if I'm wrong, but I think that we have more than 100 participants in these roundtables coming from different 7 countries. If I'm not wrong, which and from different backgrounds, not only representing the profession, but also from other sectors, as lawyers, for instance, which is very much in line with our approach to what the IESBA's outreach activity should be, so as to inform us as much as possible with different perspectives, different elements, and even knowledge, because we don't know everything that is going on outside in the outside. And this is true for all the topics and all the work streams at IESBA, but I think it's particularly important also in this one of tax planning. It is a sensitive issue. It is a very complex and difficult issue for many reasons, and Jens has already made it very clear in March, and I'm sure that he's gonna make it even more clear today. But this does not disencourage us as a board, as it does not disencourage the working group to move forward and come up with some outputs. So thank you very much for that. The working group and the staff has kindly prepared a briefing note. On the one hand, the conclusions, a summary of conclusions of the discussions and the contributions received in these roundtables, and also a briefing note in preparation of these roundtables, which very much helped making these roundtables meaningful and productive. And without any other considerations for the time being, I would kindly give the floor to Jens to present the topic. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriela. Good morning. And thank you for the opportunity to report back to you about our activities in April, May, and this month. And as you mentioned, Gabriela, the main objective of the session is to give you a feedback and a summary of the feedback we got during our roundtables, and demonstrating to you how our thinking is now and which are the next steps we want to do. And you are right, we are in the process now on preparing drafting issues, but I think it was very important, and everyone appreciated very much that we had this roundtable in this early stage of the project in respect of drafting, to get, before we start the real nitty-gritty wording issues, to have an overview from a variety of stakeholders. And I will come back to the feedback we received and people who have taken part. So I also want to share with you some views, preliminary views we have taken back from that discussions. But before coming to that, perhaps a short overview of on the agenda. The main topic is to give you an overview how we have organized and how we have managed the global roundtables. Then I will give you some thought about the paper we prepared for the roundtables. It is very, very close to that what we have discussed in March during the board meeting. So the gray zone was one of the key issues and discussion point with the stakeholders. The other very important and concerning the time we need for the discussion, I think one of the main topics was the overarching discussion, the role of a PA acting in the public interest. And I will give you some interesting feedback to that discussion. And then we discussed specific elements of a possible ethical framework we will propose. And then I will finalize the presentation with some thought of elements of this proposed ethical framework. And last but not least, the timeline. Okay, let's start. So just to let you know, the task force members, which were very actively involved in the roundtable, in the preparation, and in the workout discussions, group out discussions, were Laurie, Andy, Chana, and Sanjeev, and Carla, as you know, our principal. She has supported us very much during these roundtables. So they were all virtual, but we have organized them in a manner that more or less every time zone was able to participate at an acceptable timing. And we had, I have counted representatives, and we have to make a distinction between representatives and observers. So we had more than 100 participants, but 90-something people who were officially registered for an organization, for a professional organization, regulator, etc. And they're coming in this function from 17 countries, and you see here the analysis of the participation. We have to thank a lot of board members who supported us to reach out to certain stakeholders. Vanya, Brian, Chana, Alan, and others have helped us very much to pinpoint to the right people. We were quite successful. The only problem, as usual, we had to reach out to investors. They made very clear, even in one-to-one conversations, emailing, they are interested in the project, but they would like to join in a later stage when there is a drafting, and they have had not the time for a 4 hours round table to participate, being very frank. But I think it's very important to keep this conversation ongoing. So we have contacts, thanks to all of you, but the output from this respect was as I mentioned. So another good point was this 4 hour round table. I think no one left earlier, or very few people. So we started to count how many people were at the beginning, and a very significant number of they stayed. So that, I think, was a good outcome. It's a little bit intangible, but we thought it is a good one. Yes, what the structure of the roundtables, where we started with an introduction by Gabriella and some housekeeping, and then we had 2 or 3 external speakers from different backgrounds. So we had members of the professional organizations, academics, who a little bit showed the difference in views, or you would say in some respect extreme positions or different positions. And we had also tax authorities and regulators who gave a specific short 5 to 10 minute input. And by that, I think it was good that we had a little bit of feeling of the variety of possible views. And then in this part, we witnessed that the notion that tax planning is a complex issue, and it's a challenge to balance the interest of the employing organization or client and the public interest. And from the beginning, we heard from many speakers that the intent of the tax legislation is a very important point. Another good notion in this keynotes was that the role of the professional accountant is to navigate the uncertainties around tax strategy. So that was a notion we took on board, and it's about the multi-jurisdictional complexity in a digital world. And we heard very early in these discussions or in these keynotes that communication and documentation is a key issue. So I think with this introduction, we then started our conversation. And I want to remind the board to our nice picture on the next slide. We showed this also to the participants, and I think even though we had some discussions whether these lines are so clear or not so clear, I think this concept was more or less accepted, and I think it makes something very clear, and that is another notion I want to give here. At the beginning of the first round table, it was a coincidence, the European Commission, the paper saying that they want to start a process of regulating tax advisory services. And in the meantime, we had some outreach activities with the European Commission. And by that, it was quite interesting to understand that this distinction we have here on the picture is not yet clear as we thought, because European Commission is saying we want to address no-clar and gray zone. So they are not aware of a clear, and we try to explain a clear distinction between what is illegal, and there is a no-go area for the profession and anyone else, and the gray zone. So by that, it is important to repeat, and we have put it in our project proposal that we will also clarify this. But I think, and that was my experience, it's very important to start the discussion with this picture, green, red, and we are talking about the gray zone. So no discussion on the clearly illegal parts. So that was quite important, and we had no opposition to this clear picture. But it's important to communicate on that we have clear no-clar regulation in the code. So just to remind the board here, two slides on our thinking, and we presented this very briefly at the beginning to the audience, that we have various indicators of uncertainty in the legislation, in the judiciary. Okay, sorry. So the uncertainty zone, we made clear that this is a try for us to define this gray zone as a zone of uncertainty, and to make the professional aware of factors which are relevant in this respect. For example, new business models and the changing environment, the perception of public, and we had some discussions on the difference between public interest and public opinion. So I will come to this later. And then we try to define in this zone of uncertainty the part which we called improper or aggressive or unacceptable or egregious, and tried to give some factors which might guide the professional accountant. So we discussed about artificial transaction, the commercial purpose, substance over form, and I will come back to all these factors in a later stage of the presentation. Another factor is the lack of transparency to relevant tax authorities, and that the factual basis is not consistent. So having a duty of care, making it due diligence in this respect. And then there were we detected some indicators of improper tax planning. So, for example, exploiting gaps and the double non-taxation issues. So that was a framing for the participants, that they know where we are in our thought process of analyzing the situation in the gray zone. Then we started with some terminology issues. We discussed the challenges of finding a proper terminology, and we get some very early feedback from some stakeholders and participants who say that improper probably is not the right term, because it was, in their perspective, too close to illegal, and that's why some participants said we should rethink the language. We will do. Then the economic substance of transactions as a relevant consideration when determining the acceptable tax planning, and some suggested that we should take perhaps a term like reasonable tax planning. We have not made up our mind on the terminology, and we still think that the description of the situation is much more important than taking the notion which is globally, I take the word, accepted or understood. And we see, especially in tax law, there is a variety of thinking. And one suggestion was to focus on good practical guidance in the code, without necessarily defining exactly the gray zone. And I think that is something we discussed in the March board meeting. It's a thought process we want to encourage, and not to limit the professional judgment which is necessary in this situation. So our preliminary views of this introductory discussion, so to say, is that in some jurisdictions, the economic substance of transaction will prevail over its form. And we also see that in jurisdictions where we have general anti-avoidance rules, perhaps this aspect is included in the national laws and legislation, and making crystal clear, again, because we had some concerns articulated and listened to some concerns, that we don't want to impose any factor which is overruling national laws and regulation. But we want to show to the professional accountant that there are many terms, situations where a red light or an alarm should start. And that is a situation where the economic substance is different from the artificial structure you are creating as a tax advisor. So that doesn't mean it's now forbidden, but you are then in the gray zone, and there you have to be careful, and you have to do some due diligence, some further work effort to come to a acceptable solution. So, and that's why we are not saying this factor or that factor is a main one, but there are factors which you have to consider in your thought process. That's why an acceptable tax planning might be deemed to refer to any tax strategy that is inconsistent with its economic substance. we will explore suggestions provided by participants in the terminology issue, and we would it would be feasible to delineate the gray zone by providing guidance. I think that is very important to not just to take the notion of gray zone. Perhaps we can take it into the wording of the code, but to describe the situation and the context. I think that's very important. I will pause here for short reflection, feedback from your side for these preliminary introductory discussions we had with the roundtable participants.
Thank you very much, Jens, for this introductory presentation, and the feedback and comments of the board members are very welcome. Yes, Mark, please.
Thank you. So firstly, I think that the task force has done an incredible job trying to navigate through a really horrible subject. And I say that because you are stuck between two rocks. On one side, you have poorly drafted legislation or legislation that's out of date. And on the other side, you have interpretations through a court or through a legal process. And in the middle of that, the task force is trying to apply a logical process and logical guidance into a far from logical situation. And I agree with sort of many of the comments that have been raised, but I still have this sort of question of how we cross that bridge without something that seems to be quite sort of limiting, like, you know, we accept the fact that we've got this grey zone. Should you just stay out of the grey zone? But I think that you've done an amazing job as a group to sort of get through this and to address these issues. But there are so many different shades and colours to things that I still really struggle to see how you turn this into useful material. And I'm really interested to see where the task force goes beyond that, because it's great work, but it's really complex and difficult work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Felicia.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jens and the team for very good work done. It's indeed a very important topic as we look at many tax planning activities that are done across the world. When you're presenting, and when I read through the reports, the gray zone area looks very, of course, I would say confusing in many aspects. And when you look at it, looking at different jurisdictions, is there a possibility of maybe looking at it from the definition of each jurisdiction to maybe come up with areas that they would call gray zones, so that at least, because tax sometimes is country specific and jurisdiction specific, so it would be nice if you could have maybe PAOs or other tax bodies within jurisdictions coming up with what they would call practices that would fall under gray zone and how they can be addressed. The other thing that I was looking at is the term reasonable. I think it makes a lot of sense to look at the reasonableness of certain tax practices being carried out within jurisdictions. And I want to agree with the task force and maybe other members who made comments. that the term reasonable should be considered instead of looking at things like proper or fair. So reasonable, I think, makes a lot of sense. If we could maybe take it from that perspective, and maybe the task force can try to do more on that. But I think the gray zone consideration is something that we need to look at and consider going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Galen, please.
Yes, I think Mark framed it very well, and then also what Felician just said. But yeah, my reaction when I was reading through the papers, the unreasonable, reasonable, fair, unfair, just they just mean different things to different people. And I have a regulatory background, and I always have to go back to what could be enforceable. How is it really going to help? I think in a way you're sort of stuck with focusing on legal. What is legal in this gray zone? I don't have any great suggestions, but I think you have to begin with legal, because I don't know how. I mean, what's fair to one person is not fair to another person, and we hear about that all the time in politics and taxation. So enforceable, legal. I don't have anything else to say other than I appreciate what Mark said about that gray zone.
Thank you, Galen. Any other comment? Well, Jens, sorry. Oh, Tunam, I'm sorry, Tunam.
I agree that it's very difficult to define gray zone in a few words. So I believe I participated in the round table. I think the message was we need to describe the situation more clearly rather than defining in using one or two words. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunam. Christelle, please.
Yeah, just want to go on what Galen said just now, that back to legality, because otherwise it's unmanageable or very difficult to get out of that. But what is legal in a zone would not be legal in the other one, because they are competing, because they are doing or having poor legislations, but as a strategy, also as a country strategy, for example. So the world is very complex also in terms of how and why are delivered tax legislations. So the fact to go back to legality is to my opinion, not enough now, because if you do that, you're wrong. I mean, for public, you're wrong, and for more and more reputation side, you're wrong. So of course you can't go until to morality in tax. Is there any morality in tax? I don't know, but it is I think a very useful territory to explore for ethics. I mean, ethics is not white or black, etc. It's always dealing with the gray zones, and so I think it's worth trying to get a little bit further on that now.
Thank you, Christelle.
Thanks to Jens and the team for, I think, the excellent work in ferreting out some of these very challenging and significant issues. I think this is great. I'm wondering the extent, and I know you'll be touching on some of this later, I see in the presentation, but the extent to which the gray zone and the approach in addressing that you're thinking also about some of the discussions that have been had with respect to technology, and I'm referencing that because that's something that we'll be mentioning tomorrow that we're hearing increasingly from stakeholders, and it's a challenging issue to address in that area as well. And that I surmise that we will be seeing in the sustainability area as well, where we probably will also see areas of uncertainty, unexpected consequences and whatnot. And just, you're the first task force that's really going after the gray zone issue. And so the applicability of that kind of a framework to not just tax, although I appreciate there are very specific sort of context specific issues in the gray zone area that relate to tax, and there will be for the other areas, but the basic core of the approach for the PA, I think, can be the same across multiple areas, and that would then provide a good longevity in terms of a principles-based approach that we can take on. I just think that applicability is something to consider, and whether that's been part of the thinking or not.
Thank you, Brian. Mark.
Just one point to add. I think that's a really interesting challenge that you raise, Brian. The issue to me is that with sustainability and technology, you can always improve the position through disclosure. And I don't know whether you can with tax in a similar way, because we've been trying for years to encourage companies to be more transparent in the disclosure of their tax strategy and how they work within the constraints of what the law allows and doesn't allow. And therefore, I think that makes it even harder than perhaps it does for the other task forces and working groups. And as you say, quite unfortunate that they're the first ones going over the waterfall in a barrel.
Thank you very much, Mark, as well. Galen?
Yeah, if I might come back, and I think you're right about that, Mark. But maybe going back to, and I think you were talking about economic substance, and it seems to me like that might be the applicable approach here, and that brings you into the probability world of likely and what's unlikely, and the ability to defend a position. And I know that different jurisdictions have different reads on that. Maybe there's a synthesis of that globally that could be applied across jurisdictions.
Thank you, Galen. Any other comment? Well, if not, I think that Jens may have some responses to some of the questions. Let me just ask you something, and this is probably not relevant, but have you, with respect to the language to define this gray zone, have you tested the word illegitimate? Because it usually refers to something which is not illegal because it's not against the rules, but refers to an inappropriate usage of a right, formal right. Well, that's just one more suggestion.
Thank you, Gabriela. I will try to respond to some of your remarks, and thank you very much for your remarks, Mark. You're encouraging us to navigate through these two rocks and the waterfall. We will see how it will look like. But you're right. We are talking. It's even more difficult on a national level. You have this situation of uncertainty, but it's even worse or greater if you're going in an international context. But I'm still thinking, and thank you, Galen, for taking one of a possible factor, which I wouldn't say is globally accepted, but in most jurisdictions accepted, and more. And it's something where also the public perception is very close to a test whether an artificial structure without any economical purpose or context is seen as critical. And I'm putting now the word critical to say that it is not self-explanatory, or it's not an automatic outcome to say then you are in an illegal or illegitimate situation, but you have to be very careful and to demonstrate. So it's a burden of proof, so to say. It's now shifting to you as a professional to demonstrate that even though there is no economical substance, there is a sense which is accepted, reasonable, or whatever term you take. So I think that thought process might be something. And I think that's the only possibility in my view, and I think the task force view, that we are encouraging a thought process which is also documented, where you're demonstrating as a professional who giving tax advice that you have considered these factors and your professional judgment, have used your professional judgment to come to a possible solution or opinion in a certain situation. And by that, we are jurisdiction neutral, and we are not leaving the professional alone in a situation, because that's my thinking. The situation is there. We have situations where professional accountants were accused of having done something dodgy or illegal, and after 8 years, a court has decided, yes, this was illegal, or the other way around. But 8 years of uncertainty for the professional and the client or the employing organization. And you could put it quite defensive to bring the service provider in a situation to demonstrate that he has done his job properly. That is something we want to address. And by that, also making, and I think the transparency issue is a good point, Mark. And it was a coincidence that Elko mentioned GRI 207 in the discussion on sustainability, the tax standard. That's a standard where it said under GRI 207 that each and every company has to publish its tax strategy and country by country reporting, etc. So giving factors, which might be something also in our context. What is in a situation where a company is publishing a tax strategy? We are not aggressive. We are not in countries with low taxation rate, etc., etc. They are addressing substance over form issues, no artificial issues. And you as a tax advisor are now in a situation where they're not following their own tax strategy. I think these are situations where we're coming to the ethical dimension of this project. And the only problem is GRI 207 is not a global standard which is implemented, but it shows that even there, transparency might be a first step. And we'll come to this later. In some jurisdictions, transparency is the key issue to help the professional and the client to get a position which is accepted by the tax authority, and you are out of the illegality zoned, so to say, and taking that as a possibility. But I will come to this later. Thank you, Felicien, for your support for the reasonableness term. We will consider this, and I think the enforceability, Galen, you mentioned, is a huge issue, and we heard from the European Commission. And there was a hearing at the European Parliament at the same time when we had our roundtables, where, for example, CFE representatives were there. CFE is a European tax advisors organization. They have prepared a very good paper. We have also taken into account and had some outreach activities. And some people in the European Parliament asked how you want to enforce this. The problem is that in contrast to the auditing ethical standards, there is no national or international enforcement body which is so evolved as in the audit sector. So it might be the profession, there might be tax authorities in certain jurisdictions who are looking at that, but there's no, how to say, best practice on a global basis. And that is something we have to think about, but it should not prevent us to look for proper standards, because the next step then is to look for proper enforcement. But perhaps it's not our task, but we can encourage professional organizations, firms, and we have outreach activities to the firms and the networks. They have internal enforcement structures developed in the last few years. So I think that is something we should also consider, because it's a question which is coming very, very soon when we are drafting standards, the enforceability issue. I would like Christelle to avoid the morality term, because this is even more difficult to define. And I'm very close to that. Legality seems to be very clear. In our picture, we took clearly legal. That was by intention, because in many cases, they started to be gray zone. And in the end, the court has decided it's clearly illegal. Yeah, so we just witnessed such cases because, and that is another point we want to raise. This perspective, what is legal or illegal or gray, is changing during time and environment. And we are now in an environment, and many stakeholders have agreed to that and supported that position. They said what we would have seen as clearly legal 20 years ago, we wouldn't do anymore today without changed laws, but the environment has changed. And by that, the perception of what is acceptable, yes or no, has also changed. And by that, I think the documentation issue, the thought process, is also supporting the professional in demonstrating that at certain times he had a proper case to argue, even though a court 10 years later or 5 years later is having a total different position. And I think that is important too. So it's a safeguard, so to say, for the service provider. So it's not only to address public interest, which is very important, but it's also to safeguard a little bit the professional. Without a proper thought process and documentation, he might be lost. And thank you for this point, Christelle, and thank you, Brian, for that. What we are thinking and always saying that there are parallel issues. We are with these three project: technology, sustainability, and tax. We are going beyond the usual standard setting, I would say, in some respects, because we are in an uncertain zone where there is not a clear picture for each and everyone, but this uncertainty has somehow to be tackled, and somehow we are trying to give a compass and navigation. You could say stuff paper is enough, because we could have a stuff paper on sustainability as we're starting, but through the process we are seeing that others who are not so familiar with the code have not this ability or knowledge to easily navigate through the code and find the right solutions by applying the code. And that's why I think we must be, in this respect, more concrete and give some space to those who are not using the code every day to understand that they're covered, and to give them easy access to a thought process which is a little bit customized for a specific situation. And we don't want to deal with every situation, but those situations which are in the center of a public interest discussion. So that's a little bit the parallel. So thank you for that. And whether, Gabriela, illegitimate is the right term, we will discuss. We had it used sometimes, and I'm not sure whether we will find it, but perhaps we keep something like a zone of uncertainty or gray zone as a starting point. But I'm not sure whether this is part of a real standard or more of an application material where we use terms and describe. In some jurisdictions they are called X, Y, Z, acceptable, reasonable, legitimate, or similar, and having in the code more a generic description of a situation. So a little bit similar to that what we used in the NAS provisions for tax planning. We have not yet used the term aggressive tax planning. It's just avoidance mentioned, but we have to think about. Okay, thank you for this great first feedback round. And we now coming to more detailed issues we have discussed with the participants. The one and the overarching discussion was on the role of the professional accountant acting in the public interest. So everyone is agreeing that is true, but it's challenging to make it applicable for the certain situation. So the reason for this project is that we are recognizing that the PA is playing a very significant role in providing services to the clients or the employing organization. But on the other side, there are concerns about the perceived improper, illegitimate tax planning work. We have heard from many participants that the effectiveness of tax systems are dependent on a proper support by professional accountants. So without that, tax authorities would have to have much more resources, etc. And for the individuals, it wouldn't be possible to get to a fair taxation system, access to a fair taxation. So professional accountants are facilitating and enhancing compliance with tax laws and regulation. But what is the specific content of this notion of acting in the public interest? So there was general agreement, next slide please, across all roundtables that it is important and that makes the professional accountant perhaps different from other service providers. So the role of the professional accountant is very important. So some people said providing high quality tax planning advice is acting in the public interest. But then the next question is, what means high quality advice? It's just a technical advice, or is it a broader term? And I would say most of the people who give their opinion said it's something more, because we are expecting from a professional accountant not only technical excellence but also judgment, recommendation, a pro and con, and a specific advice in a specific situation. And this should include this broader perspective. So we reiterate that the professional accountant, and we heard, has to comply with tax legislation, full stop. But it's more also about the understanding of the laws and the process of communication with tax authorities. And by that, there's also the trust needed from the tax authorities that tax advisors, professional accountants, acting in a certain framework, so to say. So the challenges we heard are which parties are captured under the notion of public interest, and public interest is not the same as public opinion, as articulated in the press or in other means, and this perception may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And then we have the complexity issues, that we have different public interests, so plural in country A, and this might differ from country B. Our view on this, I think it was a long-lasting discussion. The first hour, I think we take for a discussion. Everyone wanted to say something, so that was very, very exciting. And we saw that it's very important to discuss this very basic issue. What does it mean to act in the public interest? A notion everyone uses every day, but sometimes it's difficult to describe the relevance in a certain situation. We then we are thinking that the professional accountant is expected to exercise its professional judgment in carrying out tax planning service. So this professional judgment is something very important. we should not define the public interest in abstract, because we would describe something in abstract with another abstract term. But we should acknowledge that a large part of acting in the public interest is to assist the employing organization, the client, complying with tax laws. That's the first point, which is clear. But we have to see that the client and that the employing organization is not acting in acting in isolation. There is a responsibility to society to pay their legally assessed tax dues. So there is something where the professional accountant is not deciding what is the fair or accepted or whatever part to pay, but the professional accountant has to address this issue as a factor. For example, what happened, we talked about this Starbucks case in UK. It was a perfect legal structure, paying no taxes in UK, but there was an outrage of customers to say it's not possible. I'm not saying that the professional accountant then has to say you have to pay X, Y, that. That's a political discussion on CEO level of Starbucks or CFO level. But to make clear, if you're doing this, you're doing business in country X with certain million turnover and you are paying no tax in that country, that might be an issue. It's a factor, an environmental factor, a perception factor. And I think tax advice, which is reducing on the technical facts and not on the outcome, is lacking something. And to address this, that acting in the public interest is, in minimum, to articulate what public perception might be on a certain structure. In the end, it's a decision of the client, and perhaps in this case or in other cases, making transparent that you have a structure with certain outcome and to address it to a tax authority to be sure that you are on the right page. But this example shows that the obligations of a good, or the context of a good advice is also to address this. And that is something about reputational risk to the employing organization or client on the one hand, and the profession on the other. We all know the reputational damage, and that was one of our starting point about Paradise paper and other papers. No one really discussed whether these structures of Panama or Paradise paper were legal or illegal. There was a discussion, yes, it was fine or not. No one knows really, because it's a question of the countries or jurisdictions which are involved. But the outcome was seen by the public as unacceptable. And I think that is something which has destroyed also the reputation of the profession and had impact, as we all know, not only to tax advising, but to the whole reputation of the profession. That is demonstrating that a profession which is acting in the public interest has, and a professional has to have a broader view on its services. So that's our preliminary views. So we don't want to define which public interest of two countries is better or higher in the hierarchy, but to make aware the professional accountant that he's acting in a conflicting zone where he have to address this conflict to his client and see how the conflict might be solved. I'm happy for feedback to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Jens. And I'm sure that there will be feedback, and we already have Christelle.
So it's very interesting, analysis from the point of view of professional advisor. I wonder, if we're not lacking something about the role of the clients and the principle the clients should also apply in terms of transparency, in terms of responsibility of those charged with governance, etc., etc. And this is not included in there. And I think when there are gray zones, companies should have a tax strategy and express it. For example, I remember that NG, but it was a few years ago, and maybe it has evolved. I didn't have a look at that, but it was, we are in countries where we have economic substance, not for legal structuring. And if we are present in low tax countries, it's because we have operational activities there. When you have such a client, I mean, it's the frontier is also helping to navigate as a professional, but I think it's a shared responsibility and it should appear to some at some point. Of course, when you say PA, it's also the PAs in firms. I understand, but I think this is this question of transparency and what I call tax strategy, tax positioning, is something important in the game.
Thank you very much, Christelle. Jens, should we take some questions?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So Sadia, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to say I'm really glad that the working group decided the task force decided not to define public interest. I think that's something that will keep us all busy for years to come. I also noted that the word public interest in the code is mainly used under the definition of NOCLA. So in the NOCLA section, there's actually a requirement that says to act in the public interest. And I was wondering if there's any consideration of the NOCLA post-implementation review that we would be taking to see how professional accountants are dealing with this and to see how this marries itself with the provisions that the task force will be drafting. I think we must be cognizant that as we draft and as we go through this journey, we keep the lines clear on when you're in NOCLA and what that means versus when you're out of NOCLA. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the provisions are, because I think that will be the real test. When you say we're acting in the public interest, what are the considerations that captures not just a local or an individual thought process, but an international thought process when it comes to the subject of taxation? Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. Rich.
Yeah, I don't know. This is so much of a question, but an observation about the challenges. But first of all, Jens, thank you to you and the working group for all the efforts here. It's a very challenging area. You used an example of where there was a perfectly legal structure that resulted in minimal or no taxes being paid. And in some cases, it may not be minimal or no taxes, but there can be very low taxes based on agreements with governmental entities. And to use the standard that the public is outraged, or as we've seen in the EU, another state files a state aid claim against the government who's reached those agreements, I think that's going to be a difficult aspect to suggest that there are aspersions cast on everybody involved in these situations, but to suggest that it was perfectly legal and may have been set up by one state in the interest of economic development, I think it's going to be hard for us to suggest that that is something that one might not consider ethical for professional accountants in business or practice. That's just an observation.
Thank you, Rich. Very interesting. Any other comment? Galen, please.
Thank you. And Jens, really appreciate the hard work that's gone into this. I don't know if I was talking to you, maybe it was Brian last night, about reputational risk. And that comes up a number of times in the paper. And I think it's fine for this to be an element of what we're thinking about and even talking about in what's being developed. But I do think I would throw out a little bit of a caution about reputation, because I'm not sure it's a great motivator, because it's based on fear. Everybody's concerned with their reputation personally, their firm, the profession. That's all well and good. But it seems to me like the ethics of what we're driving at here should be based on a foundation of ethics as opposed to fear, because I don't think fear is necessarily a good motivator.
Thank you, Gavin. Brian?
Thanks. Just on the issue of that difference that we, I think, frequently see between ethics and legality. And I know Rich raised a point, and I don't disagree with that point, but I think we can all come up with examples of areas where, strictly speaking, the PA has acted legally and yet unethically. And I think it therefore is an important area that you're addressing and need to address as part of the process. I also wanted to underscore the other side of the issue that you raised earlier, but it kind of comes right back here as well, where a PA can act in good faith, has followed a tax planning approach where it's supported by evidence, good research, communication, proper documentation, etc., toward a tax plan that, as you said, perhaps 7 years later, is nonetheless found to be illegal, by a tax court, and yet they might well have acted ethically in terms of having followed the process. And I think that's an okay place to land, because there is a difference between ethics and legality, and it's an important distinction that has to be made. And there is the potential to fall on either side of the fence, because they can operate independently. It's not convenient, but they can.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Mark?
I think there's there's a further conundrum that adds on to that sort of legality point that Brian was raising, and that's what makes the tax planning thing so difficult, is that an individual or a company can employ a professional accountant to provide tax advice. But in the event of that advice being wrong, the liability remains on that individual or that company. And I do think that is quite a heavy issue that perhaps needs to be brought out in the task force's considerations, particularly because I think, and I agree with Sadia, that we shouldn't be trying to define the public interest, but the fact that the liability remains with the taxpayer is probably a significant public interest issue. So not that I want to add sort of more work to the task force's already impressive pile of work, but I do think that that's quite an important consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for adding these points for consideration. Hero, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Jens, and the task force for this great work. I like the idea of this description of public interest, but at the same time, I'm not sure how this works how this description works when you apply this description to the gray zone. And as stated in the agenda material, what is legal is not necessarily ethical. So I think this description places a more weight on legality rather than ethical aspect. So I'm still not sure about how it works in this, this description works in the uncertain situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiro. I think that we don't have any more comments. Jens, please.
Thank you for this rich discussion. Christelle, we fully agree with your observation that the profession is just one half of the picture, and we will come to this also later. But I can say here, I think one of the key roles of the professional is perhaps to motivate the client to have a tax strategy, to use the possibility of transparency, for example, for getting advance opinion by the tax authority on a certain structure where an uncertainty is, because the professional accountant is not able to do so. The client has to do so. So to get in a dialogue, the pro and cons and giving recommendations, I think that is very important. And it's easier to act in a situation where the client has a tax strategy, because you have a benchmark where you can say, but this specific structure is against your overarching principles you are publishing or you are communicating internally. So and that is a real ethical issue then where you can work. But unfortunately, many companies do not have such a strategy. But that is something perhaps also which is a role of the accountant. And quite interesting what you mentioned with your former company. In the COVID situation, it was quite interesting that some subsidies in some jurisdictions had a condition that you are not acting or using the money for having structures in low taxation countries. And for example, a big German airline had to close up some of their subsidiaries because they get state money for surviving, and they had to rethink their structures to comply with a very small little footnote in the contracts they had to sign. So that is quite interesting, that there is a public interest of looking what you mentioned, Galen, substance, economical substance, artificial structures. So yeah, a very good point. We'll look at the issue of no-cla post implementation and to include this in our thought process. And Rich, I think your point on agreements with countries, I think that's reality. And I think the professional accountant is not the ultimate judge to say that is good, that is acceptable, yes or no. But perhaps the scope of an advice giving a certain situation may include not only the technical excellence of getting such an agreement with a country, but also saying which impact this may have, and only in this respect may have to reputation. So saying perhaps this is a proper structure, we have all the agreements here, but there might be some reservation in other countries where you are acting, because out of our experience, we know that there might be conflicts, and making this transparent to the client, I think it's part of the advice. It's a little bit as we know it in other professions, to give an informed consent. Is it called, for example, in the medical profession? The client must understand all the pros and cons and then make an own decision. I think also here, the advice of the professional accountant is not limited to just the nitty-gritty technical excellence, but included the overall picture. So having a further dimension, so to say, and that is perhaps part of the ethical framework we are thinking about. And there, such elements may be included. Not to say if such a structure is developed, and I'm following you, the Irish cases where after some I think 8 years, the European Court said, no, the European Commission was wrong. The structure was right. but it's easier for professional accountant in this situation, demonstrate to the client, we have discussed this, we have made a proper judgment, I make it transparent to the client, and we came to a decision which in the end was accepted. But even though it was, and that is good, your example from the other side, having a situation where in the end the professional accountant is in Brian, what you mentioned, have to look where it was, yes, the ethic and the legality dilemma, so to say. It's not only if it's illegal, it's also when it's legal, and the discussion was going for years, and that is the example of the Irish cases. So I think, and that is quite difficult perhaps for our audience to accept. We are not giving them a simple solution. We are not giving them a new system. We are saying that is ethical and that is unethical. We are just giving them a framework to navigate. And I think that is something which I think, Mark, I think you mentioned the liability issue. That was quite interesting to discuss with people from the European Commission on that. And they said, we do not like that in the end, if a tax structure is failing, only the company is responsible. And the advisors, they are fine. So they talked about legal and illegal issues, and we said, no, stop. If they are in the no clause, there is a clear liability, criminal and civil liability of the advisor. But in the gray zone, it's unclear. And there we are coming to the enforceability issue. So I think we have this in mind, but it's quite challenging to find a proper solution for that, because it's more on the enforcement side. But that might be something just as an idea, and that was just out of a conversation without any firm facts, because the European Commission will come with a proposal or a questionnaire in summer. So we are in a very early stage, but they said there might be something of a regulation and enforcement structure which we have in other sectors as audit. So that is an idea which is going in some directions. I don't know. I don't want to prejudge what will happen. I don't really know. But it was interesting in the discussion that the same point you raised, Mark, was mentioned there. So with the reputational risk, Galen, I think it's just a factor, or it is making the professional aware that he's not acting in isolation. There is an environment around, and that is impacting the tax advice. And in the end also, and we all know also courts are driven by public discussions and public perceptions. So they are not out of the discussion which is ongoing in a country, in a jurisdiction. And so this might be, the reputational risk might be something the client should be aware of, and the professional in the end too. But I think it's not the overarching argument for a certain behavior. I hope I have covered more or less your comments, and thank you very much. It's very, very helpful.
I'm sure you did, Jens.
Okay.
And we can now move, and this is extremely interesting. We can now move to the next part,
yes,
which is probably even more difficult.
Yeah, we are coming now to specific elements of the ethical framework, and I would like to start with the intent of legislation, which was one of the overarching issues, and Galen, you mentioned it also in the beginning. So the intent of the legislation. So we have to be aware that we have different jurisdictions with different kinds of interpretation of laws and regulations and statutes. The common law is different from the civil law, and we don't want to go into details of this jurisdictional specific interpretation rules, but we know that the intent of legislation plays in different jurisdictions a different role, but it's a factor which might be considered. And that is part of the how to say, due diligence process a professional accountant is doing when he or she is dealing with a certain situation. If there's an uncertainty in laws, you're looking for sources how to solve the uncertainty. And one of the factors, beside reading carefully the text, looking for all the resources you might find, interpretations, legal articles, court rulings, etc., is also to look at the original, historical, or actual intention of the legislator. So it is essential, and it's normal work for applying tax laws. It is part of the gathering process of all, getting all facts and circumstances, and especially to understand the challenges for specific structure. On the other hand, we think, and the roundtable participants argued that in some situation, there might be a situation where the PA is under pressure from the employing organization or the client to adopt a particular tax strategy. That was also mentioned several times. And for in this situation where there is an uncertainty, in many jurisdictions we learned there are pre-approval procedures or advance consultation possible. So many of the problems can be solved by using this possibility of a close consultation or interaction with tax authorities. And that was also mentioned by one of the participants. A good test for you as a professional accountant is, are you able to make, even if it's not possible, to, in theory, to give all the facts and circumstances of your structure to the tax authority? Or is the strategy a little bit to hide or to undermine or to misinterpret or whatever, to hide something? That is a very clear test where you can say it's unethical. So it was quite interesting from practitioners to say, even though you are not allowed to make it transparent, make this test internally, whether you could make it transparent and what the tax authority would probably answer to such a, in this specific situation, not possible pre-approval or advanced consultation process. And then the notion of artificial or contrived structures, what was mentioned several times. We all know, and we have heard it today several times, that complexity in cross-border transactions is even higher because multiple jurisdictions with different public interest considerations are involved. The courts in the end will decide. It's not the tax authority, it's not the professional accountant, the courts will decide. And that is something lawyers know. It's always difficult to know what and how a court will decide. So the uncertainty remains. Our preliminary views here on this specific topic is that the intent is a subject matter which is important. It is open to interpretation and different treatment in different jurisdictions. And the PA must know, if possible, the intent of the tax legislation. And he has to inform in the conversation with the client or the employing organization his findings or her findings. We also touched many times in the roundtables the competence issue, the professional competence issue, and this was raised in many contexts. For example, if you're not an expert in this tax law system, if you're not an expert in a foreign system, you may not be able to get all the information you need. So getting advice here, getting the necessary expertise, and it's very important. So it is necessary to include here the consultation piece in the framework, that is important to have either in your own firm or your own network the competence, or otherwise you have to look at third-party advisors in this specific situation to be sure about a foreign law issue, or even in your own jurisdiction, because sometimes it's expert knowledge you have not available. And sometimes it's difficult to get the information because you need access. So here also the role and mindset provisions play a role, that the PA is expected to apply his or her inquiring mind and not advise on or engage in transactions that are unlikely to prevail in court of law. Making it clear, advise doesn't mean that you are not allowed to, or it would be unethical to discuss with the client certain situations and structures, even though they are illegal, because you have to navigate through a thought process. So you may advise in that sense, but we are saying advising and recommending where you are not you have not a credible basis. That is a notion I will come back later, where you have not a credible basis. That would be unethical. It's difficult to define when you are at that threshold, but I think a professional accountant is able to make professional judgment. That is one of the key competencies of a professional in a difficult situation, to make a judgment, to make a proper informed judgment. No one knows what will happen after 8 years in front of the court, but making it, it's the same we are doing every day in the auditing sector. We are not sure. We don't know how this business will develop, but we have all the facts and circumstances and make a professional judgment. That is our task. And even though this credible basis means making a professional judgment, a prediction of a future development. Okay, I make a pause here because I think that's a very important point, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Jens, indeed. Any comments from the board members? Luigi, please.
Thank you, Jens, for your comprehensive explanation. I have just a comment relating to the last point, whereby probably, I don't know whether in the following presentation you will clarify this point. My view is that a professional accountant may be engaged in examining, considering different scenarios under certain transactions, and some of them could prove to be even illegal or unethical, but they should not prevent the professional accountant from examining them, considering them. The point is how to do after this work. So probably the word being engaged on or something like that should be clarified in order to avoid, say, including in your framework, in our framework, something that could prevent a professional accountant to completely and comprehensively examining the situation in order to provide the right advice to the client.
Thank you, Luigi. Mark?
This is really good because you keep giving me more things to think about, Jens. But in your, and again, you interest me a lot on that final point, because I think you're right to land on this thing about not engaging in transactions that are unlikely to prevail in a court of law. But if we look to some quite significant things, for instance, if you look back at VAT missing trader fraud, initially it was fine in a court of law because governments weren't losing much revenue. And then suddenly it became a very big number, and the courts and governments did get interested. So you've got this almost like lagging period where a PA might say, I'm very comfortable that this is not going to be in a situation where it wouldn't prevail in a court of law. but then you cross a threshold that no one yet knows what it is, and then your ability to prevail drops. And I just wonder how we take account of that. Thank you.
Thank you. First, Luigi, thank you for this clarification. We are fully in line. A professional accountant has to give a full range of information and has to examine what is legal, illegal. That's the role of a professional advice. So it's not forbidden to think about anything, any constellation, but if the client is choosing something where you are convinced it's not right, then it's different to be part then of the further process. I think that is the difference, and we are agreeing. We have to be clear in the terminology here. And Mark, I like your example because it's exactly what we have detected, also discussed with participants. Both ways are possible. First, totally legal, and in the end, illegal, and the other way around. The courts have said illegal, and then you're making a new case, bring it to the court, and you're convincing the court to do something else. And we are not saying that in both of the cases you're not allowed or it's unethical to do so, but how to do so. For example, taking even the more radical case, it's illegal under the existing law. How to get a new court ruling might be an advice you can give, but it has to be acted in full transparency, because then, and often in my former times as tax advisors, sometimes the tax authority said, go to court, please. We don't know what is right and wrong, and make a precedent here. And that is possible, but it's not hiding anything, trying and hoping that no one will see it. And that's the dodgy issue. And that's why transparency is a factor here. But we can't say because the jurisdictions have different ways of making something transparent. In US, you have a certain column in your tax declaration to mark it. In some European countries, you have a specific tax authority to address. We can't say this for each and every jurisdiction, because that's our challenge. In contrast to a national regulator, you can only have a certain level of abstract elements, and then the professional has to make a proper judgment. And in your cases, I think this thought process, even though you're coming to the outcome, it's legal now, and you have made this process, no one will blame you if a court will decide 5 years later differently. It might be, under the ethical issue, that the public may be different. But if you're showing, and I think that is part of every good advice in a tax situation, that you're saying to your client, it's now our state-of-the-art opinion today, it might change during, and sometimes that's also the practice, in a discussion with the tax authority, that there is a case which is not in line with the ruling of the courts, but the tax authority is happy with that. So also this type of conflicts you have. So I think the reality is even more difficult or complex as our models here. But I think it's not speaking nothing against this approach we are trying to achieve, because if you are acting in this manner, making transparent, making clear to your client the facts and circumstances, the positions, and the risk of development, I think you are in a good shape as a professional accountant, and the client is aware of risks. But thank you for these excellent examples.
Thank you very much, Jens, and those who provided these comments and examples. I don't think that we have any other comments at this stage. So if you want to move forward,
yes,
Jens.
I think we're good in timing. We had then some specific questions. I will go a little bit quicker now. It's about threshold for affirmative advice. It's about what I mentioned just now, or in the last few minutes. If there's uncertainty, there must be a full, transparent risk assessment for the likelihood that the transaction would prevail, yes or no, and the client must be aware. And there's a due diligence obligation by reviewing all the precedents and pronouncements of tax authorities, etc. And then we talked about thresholds, which is always interesting because I've never been able to say whether I'm 51% sure or 49% sure or even 62. So it's just a thought or a theory, but it's quite interesting to have such a model for rethinking where you are positioned in a certain situation of a tax advice. We discussed, some participants said, if the threshold is less than 50% in their jurisdiction, they would not advise the employing organization or the client. Other participants said, in their jurisdiction, that even lower than 50% is accepted. In some jurisdictions, we talked about US, it's significantly lower than 50%, but, and that is very important, only if it's made transparent to the tax authority. So you see again that transparency plays a role even for this threshold issue. And that's why we will not say there's a threshold of 51% or whatever, and that's the right approach. But the probability is a risk assessment for you, and you have to make it transparent to your client. And then we were also confronted with a situation where, again, the tax professional has to get advice. And if the client is disagreeing with some reflections of you. So, which are our preliminary views here? We have in the code, you do remember the IESBA provisions, the notion of likely to prevail. We are not seeing as appropriate to describe or give a numerical probabilistic measure. But we think that the PA should not advise the employing organization or client if he or she believes it is unlikely that the tax treatment will prevail, but we will find the right notion. For example, the PA has not been able to establish a credible basis. That is something perhaps as a term which was more or less accepted by the participants. More to have a credible basis, everyone has some ideas what that means. I have to collect facts and to make a professional judgment on that. So factors for that, or consideration for that credible basis, is a need of undertaking appropriate due diligence, transparency considerations, if possible, to the tax authorities, documentation, and even though if you're in disagreement, you have to think about what consequence this might have to perhaps to end the engagement with a client. And another question is, where is the threshold for not continuing to work for the employing organization? I will stop again here to get some feedback questions from your side.
Thank you, Jens. Rich, please.
Yeah, on that last point, Jens, any thought process around what happens when, because I totally support, and I think it's consistent with what we did in NAS for auditor independence, that you shouldn't be advising a transaction or approach or treatment that you don't expect is likely to prevail. But what happens when somebody else advises that treatment? When you say don't advise, does that, a few moments back, you suggested there could be situations where you could still discuss the matter and talk about your concerns, and or, as you mentioned in this discussion, you may not have advised on the transaction, but you might have to advise on what the proper transparency and disclosure is in filing. Is that consistent with what you're thinking, or I'm just kind of reading the words and trying to follow through? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I will continue. Another issue, even though some of the participants said that this is nowadays a rare situation, is the referral to a provider of packaged tax planning products, because some of the participants said in their jurisdictions it's not anymore so relevant. But in the course of the discussion, we get the agreement that there are jurisdictions where that might be, and there might be professionals who still are offering packaged tax planning products. We all know that the hype was 10 to 15 years ago, and nowadays is less, but there are differences in jurisdictions. So there was general agreement across all roundtables that the PA has to inform the client of his or her relationship with the external provider. And we all know how dangerous it is to refer to someone else, because the client is normally taking you in a kind of liability for the advice they are getting. And that's why you have to ascertain that the provider has appropriate knowledge and expertise in developing such products. And the PA has to be responsible for the reliability and consequences for the particular product, including which impact that might have to the client's financial statement. And be cautious a little bit when referring to an external provider. And again, he or she should not be involved in transactions that are or would be perceived as artificial or contrived. We heard from many participants, and we discussed about the disclosure of commissions or referral fees, and that was quite interesting. That we have a variety of solutions in several countries. In some countries, it's forbidden to get any referral or commission fees. So it's important to know that. In other countries, there is a need of transparency. And here it's perhaps also worth to mention that the code has something in section 330.5 A1 to 2, where one safeguard is transparency for referral fee and commissions. So it's not prohibited under the code, but there's a threat, and it might be prohibited if there is no safeguard to reduce the threat to an acceptable level. So we discussed this, and some elements, our preliminary use of due diligence on the part of the professional accounting is concerning the tax planning products being sold by the provider, and to know the one to whom you are referring. It is important that this is not a packaged product, but that it's tailored to the client specifics and circumstances. And we may revisit the current provisions in the code just for that situation, or give some examples for that. In that part, we will think about for a potential enhancement in the light of the roundtable feedback on the provision issue. These are our views to this perhaps quite specific item. Any views?
Please.
It's just an observation. I think this issue will or may occur in the next, where the auditor just refer a IT service provider to the client. I think there could be similarity or common issues applying to this issue and the one at next provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonam.
Any other comments?
Okay. Another interesting discussion, and I haven't mentioned it earlier, we had in each and every breakout lawyers from International Bar Association, and thanks to Scott, who has given us the access to the colleagues, it was a very good experience to have other professionals doing tax advice, giving their opinion, and especially to the impact of legal opinion when dealing with uncertainty. So there was general agreement across all round tables that legal opinion does not mean that the PA need not exercise their professional judgment. So I think that was especially also addressed by the lawyers. We are giving just our opinion. You have to make the final recommendation to the client. It was quite interesting. So they accepted this collaboration in this respect. On the other hand, PAs have a responsibility to escalate the matter to the relevant parties, and PAs have to look at an ethical dimension. I'm not saying that lawyers have their own ethics, but they're having a different role to play. The PA is also responsible for communicating the risks. And then we heard that the PA should be encouraged to avoid situations where they cannot access all the relevant facts and circumstances to take a position, because it was made the point that in many circumstances, or in some cases, the PA is not getting all the necessary information. You just get, here is a legal opinion, just do it, it's all fine. So that's not the right approach. Even though there are excellent names of law firms being addressed, it's the responsible of the PA, if he or she is giving the advice, to make a proper assessment of that. Our preliminary views on that discussions are that we see in the next slide, please. Thank you. It's helpful sometimes to get a second opinion or to get other advice. That might be a good point, especially if you're dealing with foreign countries and jurisdictions. That's all fine. And we also know that legal opinion is sometimes necessary because in certain jurisdictions, just lawyers are allowed or usually are doing tax advice. So there is a multidisciplinary aspect in this. Where the PA's view is in conflict with the legal counsel's opinion, first of all, the professional accountant should understand the reasons for differences of view, whether there's a full information given, discuss the matter further, and if necessary, escalate it with the relevant parties at the employing organization, and there those charged with governance are involved, perhaps, depending on the client's organization. And the client or the employing organization should be made aware of the risk, including reputational risk or otherwise of pursuing the tax planning strategy for which the likelihood is uncertain. And very important, there is risk of an intimidation threat, we have heard. It is important that the professional accountant's responsibility to exercise their professional judgment, and he or she has to make the final decision of recommendation to the client. For sure, the client is making the final decision, but he or she must make a recommendation on its own and not just referring to legal opinions of others. I'm pausing here for another round of feedback.
Thank you, Jens. Galen, please.
Yeah, on that first bullet on that particular slide, I'd just be careful with, the serve to reinforce doesn't really demonstrate professional skepticism. I mean, maybe you have an opinion that does support a position, but I wouldn't necessarily think that that's the way to go on that. I don't think that's what is meant here.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Galen. Sadia.
I'm sure, like many others around the table, as we're going through these last four sections, I couldn't help thinking how the code already applies. We have a conceptual framework, we have a section on second opinions, referral fees, but maybe some of these sections need to be highlighted, re-engineered, repurposed, more emphasis on certain matters. But I hope that the task group refers first to what's in the code, seeing, I started having consideration, is this a threat or is this a condition? And that nuances is what's going to get us into a framework that's usable and will get us the best final output. Thank you.
I fully agree, Sadia, and we had also one discussion where one participant said it's not necessary to do anything because we have it in the code. We said, yes, it's true, but also for independence, we do not need anything. Part 4A and B, no need for, because it's just a fundamental principle in a specific situation. But it's helpful to make for a specific situation which is seen as specifically relevant. And we have made the experience that tax planning is still an issue which is in the public domain, a very relevant issue to make this connectivity, and I called it earlier, easy access for those who are not so familiar with the code. And that was a feedback we got from many representatives from the firms. They're saying one of the challenges is not to understand the code, etc., but to make also everyone in a firm, in a network, clear that the code is relevant for also this type of services, because they are far away from the everyday usage of the code, even more if they are not part of the profession, because they are in another regulated profession which have different frameworks. And by that we are supporting a little bit also the rollout of the code in this specific service area. So looking to the clock, I think we are quite at the end, and just want to summarize a little bit our proposed ethical framework with one slide, which will guide a little bit our ongoing thought process. And in July, when we are meeting here at the task force, where we will then try to start to draft a strawman and etc. Perhaps this is a picture where you can find some of the elements we discussed. And again, thank you very much for this very thorough and good, rich discussion. To comply with the fundamental principles and highlight the types of threats, to exhibit mindset and behavior expected following the role and mindset provisions of the code. And I think it's a little bit what you, Sadia, saying. We are trying to connect this with the extant code. Understand applicable tax laws and regulation, the legislative intent behind the relevant laws and regulation, and the economic purpose and substance of the transaction. To exercise professional judgment, to establish a credible basis for the tax planning advice in circumstances of uncertainty, and to consult internally or externally with qualified expert, which might be part of specific actions to address identified threats, to communicate relevant matters or concerns with clients, management, or those charged with governance, including as part of an escalation process where necessary. Evaluate the need for transparency, having regard to PA's duty of confidentiality under the code, to make clear it's a client who is the primary role to make transparency, to develop appropriate level of documentation, to make clear the thought process and the judgments, the decisions, recommendations, and actions, and respond, last but not least, to suspected no-cla when encounter information that tax planning might have stepped over the line, we called it, into an actual or suspected breach of tax laws and regulation. So that is, in a nutshell, a little bit the horizon we are facing. And perhaps I'm coming also before making the next pause here, or the final pause, is some broader considerations we also received from stakeholders, because we had a last question, anything else? And what was anything else? ESG. And that was not only articulated by few, I would say by the majority of participants. We should have in mind the connectivity with these ESG, because tax planning has become an essential part of the increasing focus among investors and other stakeholders. So we were encouraged to have this in mind, and tax policies and strategies should be key considerations here. So I think we have discussed it today, and we will continue to see the connectivity, and the transparency issue for me is one of the key elements where we have a consistent approach, as I mentioned, GRI 207, and similar regulation in some jurisdictions where the country by country reporting and other transparency. I think UK has also enacted the transparency for certain companies of their tax strategies, and that is a trend which is supporting our efforts here. And then last but not least, and we had yesterday the presentation on professional development and education, that one of the key issues and challenges is that, and some of the participants mentioned this in their jurisdiction where there is an unregulated profession, the knowledge of complex structures and cross-border structures is limited. And what we have heard today too, what was legal in the time of my education might be illegal or gray, or some warning signals nowadays. So this professional development is very important, and that's a duty to serve the client's interest. On the next slide, lastly, our timeline. So we are now in the turning point, you see. We are in June 22, and we want to approach to you in September with hopefully some tangibles, and we will work hard to fulfill the high expectation we have. Also, we hope we will succeed, and we are looking forward for your feedback. And I think that was a very helpful discussion we had today, and I'm open for any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens. And before closing this topic, we would like to hear from the board members about these projects and these plans of the task force with respect to the next steps, but also about these last considerations made about the proposed ethical framework, which as we have already seen, it's already very advanced and encompasses a lot of action points already. Mark, please.
Thank you. Really like the ethical framework. I think it's really helpful. But I think 2 points in respect to it. First, under the comply piece, absolutely right that we anchor everything in the fundamental principles, but we're applying the fundamental principles to a framework in many tax jurisdictions that's largely compliance based. So I think that if we're going down this route, we probably need to look at what sort of application material there is to help the application of the fundamental principles into a largely compliance-driven process, because that will change the sort of type of threats that drop out. And then my other comment was in respect of respond. Absolutely agree with you where you are on no-cla, but in a number of jurisdictions, you may have requirements that sit on professional accountants that they need to report to regulators matters that might be of interest to that regulator. So not NOCLAR in itself, but something that sort of ticks over the line. And I also think we need to accept the fact that you quite rightly, or the task force quite rightly points out that the TP might have stepped over the line. They might not have stepped over the line might have moved under them as well. But I think it's a really helpful framework, so thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Luigi, please.
And yes, on the last slide, it seems that we are keeping December as a due date in order to complete the approval of the exposure draft. And I wonder whether you have considered that it is feasible, considering that you are, let's say, it is not, it is my query, just to understand, because if I understand correctly, the straw man will be available for the September meeting. And it seems to me quite challenging to be in a position to approve an exposure draft in December. Well, it could happen, but it is pretty challenging.
Thank you, Luigi. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jens, for your presentation. And just on the ethical framework, I think it is in the right direction. I would be interested in looking at how the credible basis is built out. And apologies for joining the meeting late. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Robert? Robert?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for Jens for the wonderful presentation and the very rich discussion from board members. I'm sitting here on the other side of the world listening to this in the middle of the night, and it's actually keeping me awake, which is great, very stimulating. The message from the PIOB on this project is unchanged. We're continuing to be very supportive of this very challenging project, which it clearly is, and we've got a lot of confidence in the way it's tracking. The feedback from the roundtables was very helpful, and it's clearly provided a good direction and material for the task force to start working on its concrete proposals. And the little glimpse that we just saw of it was very encouraging. Jens, well done for presenting that right at the end. So we can be pretty comfortable with the direction, focusing on developing a principles-based framework as the appropriate way forward. And in doing so, trying to focus on understanding and unpicking the types of practices and indeed the intentions that sit in the grey zone, where it's not just a matter of legal compliance, even if that might be the starting point. So all of this seems very well grounded in the conceptual framework, and this will help to ensure the public interest is well served. I was the PIOB person who was able to observe one of the roundtables. It was the Oceania one, and it was a very interesting and good discussion, and it was fascinating to have the discussion with the group that I was in, that I was allocated to, about distinguishing or equating the public interest with the interests of the client, and I think that was clearly a helpful discussion throughout the roundtables, and you've been able to draw on that, and how you deal with this question of understanding the intent of the legislation, and whether this is inevitably subjective or capable of objective definition, as it is in some legal systems. And then how you deal with the uncertainty about what the court might decide and when it might, or how long it's going to take, which are all inherent issues with tax, as we know. So it's probably fair comment that the project shouldn't attempt to define or describe the public interest or to define the grey zone, and it doesn't look as though you're going to need to do that. The factors that have been discussed today around economic substance and commercial purpose are clearly key elements, along with professional judgment and the wider considerations that continue to be identified as a theme, and the mention just towards the end there of ESG was good to hear. So clearly it was a successful outreach, contributing into a very rich discussion today, and commend the board for that. Chair, just a quick note on process, because the POB obviously has the focus on good process and the public interest. It was very good to note the numbers of delegates who participated in the events. As I understand it, 18 jurisdictions were represented, representing quite a range of stakeholder groups. The majority did come from the profession. I think firms were 31% and PAOs 41%. The group I was allocated to in the roundtable I attended was very well balanced, but can I just check whether the working group is happy with that balance of involvement to date? And perhaps would it be helpful for the task force to carry out some further targeted outreach, especially from stakeholders beyond the accounting profession, tax regulators, perhaps more formally than those who attended through the roundtables. We've mentioned international organisations such as the OECD before, and I think you're talking to them already, but also other tax professionals, and it was good to hear you've been talking to the legal profession. So you may be doing this already, but just the question is there as to, are you comfortable with the balance of involvement you got through the roundtables, and what's the plan going forward between now and the time you come to the next meeting? So we'll certainly look forward to seeing the task force's proposals when they emerge, and hopefully you'll be able to keep to that time frame that has always been regarded as challenging, but we'll keep optimistic about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Brian?
Thanks. Yeah, so very supportive of the ethical framework that's been presented. And I think that this is exactly the sort of the core of this item, is that core that I was referring to, that goes not just to the tax gray zone issues, but other gray zone issues. So in that way, I think this is a fantastic direction. I'm going to be interested in how the task force looks at potential code changes, because of course there's a lot of items in this list that are already present within the code. Not all of them though, and not all of them perhaps to the extent that they might be. So, I mean, the notion of transparency, of course, is in there. Is there a desire to increase that? And you've heard that going back to the technology working group phase 1, right? And I think it comes up here again. Again, you've got the notion of complexity, right? And what's being done with the tech task force's ED with the language that's already out. Is that sufficient? And I'm not trying to suggest it's not, but you have cross concepts in here. And so pulling out and teasing out what's in there and what might need to be more, or what is already being addressed adequately by an existing exposure draft is going to be interesting. And if nothing else, certainly I see an opportunity for some non-authoritative materials to be able to connect the dots as you're doing here, to say, look, a lot of this is already in the code, if not all, and that's obviously a decision for the task force and eventually the board, but to tie these different concepts in the approach together. And I think that is going to be interesting, and obviously it will consume a bunch of your time in the next few months. Also, I just wanted to mention, kind of reinforce a point. So you had talked about that interconnect between sustainability and tax incentives, and I'll mention sort of anecdotally, but just from another stakeholder's perspective, the engineers and the work that we were doing and have been sort of ongoing with them, it was the engineers that proactively, in fact, to us, raised the issue from their perspective of that connect between tax incentives and how their professionals as well are being incentivized by organizations to undertake certain activities around sustainability, and also then the potential for misapplying those incentives, or for trying to find ways that you might technically be in compliance with what the requirements are to receive some kind of incentive, but are you really doing that? So it's interesting to see that come up in another domain as well. It's certainly not just accounting. This is a cross-professional thing, but it does come down back to tax or any other kind of incentive, I guess, for that matter.
Thank you, Brian. Robert, do you want to come back to the discussion? Because your hand is still raised. I don't. Okay, thank you.
My apologies, Chair. I haven't taken it down.
No problem. No, I was just making sure.
Yeah.
And finally, Ken, I think.
Thank you very much, Chair Diaz. I thought I'd just take a few moments to just reflect a bit on the process we have gone through, and I heard Robert commenting on the process. And as I reflect on the journey this board traveled in the development of the no-clause standard, and that was completed in 2015 when none of you would have been on this board. But I was around then, and it is a huge difference between the two processes. As I reflect on them now, the journey we've traveled on this project has really benefited from this experience that we lived through when we developed no-clause. And I would say back then, around 2014, when this board back then came back from a first exposure draft, when across the board, almost across the board, stakeholders had come forward to say, these proposals that you put on the table will not be workable. We will not be able to accept them, because that board at the time had gone forward very ambitiously and for the right reasons, because no-clause was a huge issue in the public interest. But that board back then had said, we see a position that we believe in our judgments, in our considerations and deliberations should be the right outcome in the public interest. And that outcome basically was a set of prescriptive provisions in the code that that board was proposing at the time. And stakeholders have said, look, there's more to it than just when you come up with evidence or information that's just an instance of no-clause, you report to an appropriate authority. And essentially, that's what stakeholders were telling us, that there's a lot more behind the curtain, so to speak, or that you need to peel the onion a lot more. And it came to a point back then where the board said, this is too much. And it was a real question that was put on the table. Should we abandon this project at the time, because the pushback was so significant? And after much deliberation, the board said, we're going to take on board all the feedback, and we're going to pull back, and we're going to do some serious reflection as to really what we want to achieve in dealing with the issue of no-clause. And the board then came to a good landing spot to say, really, we want to help suss out sort of the thought process. Help the accountant see what the tension is going to be as they navigate the situation. What are the various dimensions? What are the issues that they need to think about? What are the questions they need to raise? And importantly, to Christelle's earlier point, which is a very important point, it's not just the role of the accountant to deal with no-clause, but there is, on the other side, the management of the company. There is those charged with governance. There is the role of the appropriate authority. There is an ecosystem that needs to be drawn into the accountant's thought process to enable them to have that dialogue to see how best to respond to the issue. So the process back then benefited from that experience of having gone out very aggressively, if I can put it that way, with some prescriptive proposals, but then hearing back from the stakeholder community to say, you need to be a bit more considered in your thinking, involve more of the stakeholders, and importantly, socialize how you're thinking about working for the issues. And I couldn't be happier that precisely that's what we've done in this project so far. Right? And I couldn't emphasize how much work has gone into putting together the global roundtables. literally within 4 weeks from start to finish. We had lined up over 100 participants or whatever the number is. And, I'm looking at Carla. She was the engine behind or under the hood that kind of drove all the work, and the task force was involved, all hands were on deck. And Jens, I think you did a fantastic job being in all 3 roundtables and leading 3 breakout groups. A huge amount of effort that went behind the scenes to really collect all the input that I see reflected in already this outline of an ethical framework. That as I listened to the discussion in the roundtables, what also was pleasing was to see people nodding, to say yes, we can see that these are important considerations, and we can see and we can agree with you that these are important factors, and importantly, think about these also. So in other words, it was a two-way traffic. It wasn't just a task force putting forward some thoughts, but we were hearing also some good insights that will be very useful to this task force as you start to put sort of pen to paper. So I think the process has worked very well for us, and importantly, as I say, the element of socialization to stakeholders at large. And it wasn't just, admittedly, there was quite a large contingent from the profession, the firms, some POs, etc. But we had representation from the regulatory community, tax authorities, securities regulators, importantly, the lawyers, and others as well, some academics. So I think we managed to get a sort of good range of sort of input, and the diversity is going to help us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. And we still have Laurie.
Yeah, I agree with everything Ken said. I was around on the practitioner side when NOCLAR came out, and I think it landed in a very good place, but I think you described that well. What I would say, and I think this addresses in part Robert's question about will there need to be more targeted outreach or other, I do think this was fantastic, and the fact that there were a fair number of people from the profession, as well as regulators and securities regulators and tax leaders from the regulatory community, was very good. But I think the thing it did was really deal with a bit of the anxiety that seemed to have been resident. It was like a kind of floating anxiety around this that didn't really need to be the case. And I think people, so I think as this comes out, and when I looked at Jens' timeline, one of the things we have talked about is that additional layer of socialization and reach out once we have something concrete, because I think seeing how well this worked, that's going to be very important in helping to land this once there's something concrete in place. Because I think, ignoring, we aren't doing that, but anytime you ignore the anxiety, people gap fill that space with negative energy. So it's much better to talk about those concerns and work through them. And I think Jens did a fantastic job of doing that, but I think we're going to have to continue to do that as the drafts evolve.
Sure. Thank you, Laurie. Jens, any final comments?
Yes, just to some of the remarks you made. I think the timeline we are trying to achieve, but we have heard several times also from representatives from PIOB, quality is the main objective. And we will see how the discussions, how good we are with our first proposal, and we will have outreach activities. So yes, we want to have other stakeholders directly involving in our conversation. And for example, during our next task force meeting in July, we are planning to have outreach activities also with Brazilian tax authorities, so also in other G20 jurisdictions. And we are in a constant exchange with the European Commission, which are preparing something in a questionnaire, and they are very interested in our project. So we have said, as soon as we have drafted or clear drafting ideas, we will come back to some of the stakeholders and to continue this discussion. Whether we will have other roundtables, we have not yet decided. It's a question of balancing here. but we will definitely outreach to OECD and other, and we also invited OECD, for example, for the roundtables, and we are keeping contact with them, and so that is the agenda for the next month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens. If there are no other comments, I'll close here. But before that, let me allow me to say a few things about this project and about this discussion. Ken has fortunately already stressed very important things with respect to this project and its importance. But I don't resist saying that I'm proud of this board and of the working group because of this project as well. It's a very important project. It's very interesting and challenging. Starting with the intellectual perspective, it's amazing. We could discuss these topics for very long. It calls for our makes a call to our intellectual agility and knowledge, ability to connect the dots, etc. So it's very interesting. But besides that, and that is important, of course. But besides that, and it's very complex and extremely complex for all the reasons. The discussion here today and what has been presented by the task force clearly shows the complexity of the issue, the sensitiveness of the issue as well. And so I'm also proud for the courage of this board of engaging and moving forward with this project. Nevertheless, these are all reasons for us to be proud and to be happy with what we heard here today. The incredible amount of work, it's also to praise, but it's not not only in terms of quantity but in robustness of the work. And it leaves me very confident about the future of this project, because despite the complexity, the difficulties, the sensitiveness, etc. of the project, what we have seen today here, I think it's very solid work and very solid grounds to move forward in the direction of what Jens has proposed here. I'm very grateful as well to the board for the rich, substantial contributions and very constructive contributing to the quality of the work. This is also, and I'd like also to stress that alongside the intellectual challenges, the quality of the work, etc. This is one of the topics and the work streams where I see a lot of purpose and the possibility of IESBA of being impactful, making a positive impact. I was very happy to listen to Ken comparing this with our past and making us understand how much we learned. We all learned over time, but also very happy to having Jens mentioning that this is about going beyond the traditional, usual standard setting activity, just like on sustainability and technology. This shows a different approach, a more purposeful for sure, but innovative approach of IESBA with respect to the standard setting work, which is also something that makes me very happy. Of course, what we have seen is a concrete proposal and ethical framework, which again leaves me very confident. We have heard here some calls to look to what we have and start from there and not depart from there to something completely new. Of course, this is not only understandable but desirable. But of course, I understand as well that we have to do something in addition or to adjust that. The connectivity between the tax planning and ESG, I think that we will keep on listening about this as we advance in both the projects. It is clear that there are links not only with respect to the process, but with the substance of the two projects. I was also happy to see that we are in a turning point, as Jens mentioned, but it was in green. which in a project management, it's not always like that. We usually, the turning point is always called the Death Valley. And it's usually written in editing in red. So the fact that it is green, it's not only because it's sustainable, but it's hopeful. Good to see that. On the time and schedule, yes, of course, we know that quality is the main goal here, but and I'd say that time is also a part of quality, but I stick to that goal. But again, the robustness and clear vision of this project makes me confident that it is possible to go to reach the time schedule that you have been working for. So thank you very much. We are a bit late, 20 minutes, I think, late regarding the schedule, but so I will ask for your understanding and keep the break a little bit shorter, 15 minutes, if you're okay. Also because we have a short update from Mark at the start of the next session, or before the next session, on the sustainability thoughts and decisions yesterday after the board meeting. So 5:11, we would reconvene. Thank you very much. So thank you for coming back. I think that you all needed a short break, but I'm sorry not to give you as much time as needed. But we still have some items in the agenda today. One of them, and this is why I'm also a little bit in a hurry, is that Mark is going to provide the board with an update after the board discussion yesterday. The working group met, and Mark has something to report to the board, and I thought it was important for us to listen to the suggestions and the proposals and the vision of the working group adjusted under in the light of the discussions yesterday. Mark, please.
Thank you, Gabriella. So we took paid a lot of attention to the board's discussion yesterday. And I think what we all agreed on is the importance to demonstrate that we are moving forward with some pace. And I think that very much reflects the feedback, Gabriella, that you've had from IOSCO and also from monitoring group members more widely. So what we have proposed to do is that we are changing the focus of the working group slightly. And our intention is to return to the September meeting of the board with effectively a vision setting out what work we're going to do. And that work will talk about the 3 different stages: the awareness raising, the non-authoritative guidance, and proposals to revise or amend provisions in the code. Now, what we won't have is we won't have detailed text of what those changes would be, but we will set out the areas of the code and the subjects that we would propose to change. And then, subject to the board agreeing those proposals in September, we would then work up 1 or maybe 2 project plans that we would ask the board to consider and potentially approve in December, which would then allow this working group to deliver its mandate. And then we would ask the board to set up task forces to take forward the standard setting activity and other things that we need to do. So what we're looking at is an aim that moves us from development to production by the end of this year, and allows us to come back to the board with some substantive proposals. The working group will be meeting in London on the 25th and 26th of July to develop those proposals and set them out, and then to work those up ahead of the September board meeting. But we hope that that will firstly better address the board's ambition to be shown to be making progress, and also to move forward in lockstep with the IEESB as they develop their proposals. And I think, given that Robert's sitting there very large on one screen, I can see at the moment, just behind you, Galen. I think obviously we recognise the important public interest issue in being able to propose the necessary changes to the code to support high quality sustainability information and its assurance, and to do so in a way that coordinates and aligns with the IEESB and also the work of the IEESB. So I recognise that we have taken on quite a lot. As a result, we will not produce a report to the board. Our focus will be on developing the project plans to allow the working group to transform into a task force or task forces. And I think that better reflects the urgency of the need to take this forward. So I hope that addresses some of the points that were discussed in yesterday's board meeting, and will also help us to be seen to be moving forward with pace. And I know that there's a lot of interest that you're already dealing with, Gabriella, from IOSCO and other stakeholders about how are you going to demonstrate IESBA that you can move. I believe that we can through these proposals. So thank you.
Responding in Italian, eppure si muove. It moves, and I'm very happy that and very grateful to the working group that you decided to meet right after the board meeting yesterday. So very effective and very quickly, and adjusted the direction and the plans of the working group in the light of what we have heard here at the board yesterday. So that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Thank you very much for your agility and flexibility, which is also important. And it's something that we will have to use extensively on the next few times. Listening to you, listening to Jens, I'm happy that not only we are going to meet in person in September, but that it's going to be in Nashville, because we will need the music to make us dance to the sound of the music with everything that we will have to decide then. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much to the working group as well. And yes, of course, I'm happy with the direction you are proposing, and I hope that the board as well. Is there any comment or any? Oh, sorry, Robert, I was not seeing you. Please.
Yes, just a quick comment from me, and I did see that I was on the big screen. And I was typing furiously, Mark, when you were talking, just to get the gist of it. But thank you, and look, that's fantastic to hear that, and that's really responsive to those needs. So very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. Any comment? Well, if not, thank you once again, and let's go and move. We will now move forward to the next item in the agenda, which is the presentation of the update from the EIOC, from the Emerging Issues and Outreach Committee. I must say that from what I have seen from the presentation that has already been distributed, this is very auspicious. And very auspicious updates and some proposals and food for thought, which is exactly the subject of the EIOC, which provides the working group, provides the board with the precious contribution in terms of monitoring what's happening around and providing us not only with the thoughts but with the material which is critical for us to make decisions on what to do and how to do. So thank you very much, Vanya, and the working group, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriella. We'll try to make a very short presentation. We plan to just to give an update, since our last meeting in March, if you remember right, sustainability was a big portion of our agenda for this year. And with the creation of the Sustainability Working Group, which makes tremendous sense, we need to discuss what to put in the agenda for the group. And then we combined it to come back in June and make some proposals. That's why what we will be trying to do right now very shortly and save time for putting the agenda back in the time place. But we will have very short updates from the UK initiatives that Mark will be generally providing us. And Martha has prepared for us an update of the regulation consultation that was a public audience from the European Parliament that was closed in February, the main aspect, so we can monitor the result of that. Okay. The first point that we would like to bring the agenda is the Ukraine conflict, because when the war started, everyone thought that would be a very short war with very few repercussions that will be dealt quite fastly. And it was not so. We had just completed 100 years of conflict, and we have no forecast about when this war will end. And of course, many questions has been put in the market about the result of this conflict, and we understand it's something that we should have a look at under the ethical aspects of some of these questions. Many sanctions were put into place in order to push Russia to interrupt this war, and so far they had not yet generated the results that were anticipated. And I think that escapes the plan, escapes the forecast that were put initially. So we understand there are some doubts, some insecurities, some uncertainties that IESBA should address in order to help this period that we are living. So what we are proposing here is to recommend that IESBA staff generate a staff alert about that, as it was done by several organisms like ACCA, like the one that I do recommend if you did not look at, which is the one produced by the Consultative Committee of Accountancy Bodies from Ireland and UK. They are very good and very objective, and you received the material, but they are very clear in which aspects the ethical side should be considered. For example, the application of the fundamental principles. Oh, yeah, it's this one, sorry. The application of the fundamental principles in a situation as the one that we are living, not necessary, they are being observed because many companies had closed business in Russia, and then we do not know who will be preparing financial statements, who will be auditing, and if these teams that will be taking charge, if they are committed to the fundamental principles or not. What will be they doing if they are in a situation of no car? How will the teams be dealing with pressure? The presentation of the financial statements and disclosure, for example, they will be needing to tap at experts other than accountants, and how can we be positive that the fundamental principles are being fulfilled in this case? with the question of the war and families migrating to other countries and professionals under pressure, and a climate of war, for example, even in companies outside Russia and Ukraine, there is a huge possibility of conflict using, for example, medias, because those who are against or in favor of one part of the other can use medias in order to make personal comments, and that can raise some conflict and things like that. So we understand that if you look with the ethical lens, there are a huge reason for us to raise alert about the ethical aspects of some of these points. So what we are proposing is for IESBA board to agree that the staff generate a staff alert in this sense, as it was done by other bodies before us. And we cannot wait much because the results are already there, and we already have 100 days of conflict to take into consideration. Then I stop here and hear from you.
Thank you, Vanya. Yes, we can now collect the board's approach to this proposal, see if there are any views against this proposal or any additional suggestion. No. If not, Vanya, you can consider it agreed by the board and allocate it to the. Sorry, Sadia.
Thank you, Vanya, for setting out what's the intention of the EIOC. I've also reflected on the various communications that have been coming out from various jurisdictions. And I wondered if you've also noted a pattern. A lot of the topics that we had on screen is actually topics that we covered in the no-plug guidance. And some of the topics that will be covered in this guidance or this non-authoritative material might be useful for future events. And maybe the theme that the EISBA should look at is change, some rapid change that happens in the market, that guidance or pointers or alerts that's needed for ethical considerations. And if the non-authoritative material is drafted in that way, then it can be used not just for this event, but hopefully not needed, but if possible, future events lean towards that kind of ethical messaging, it could be repurposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. Jana?
My initial reaction was with there are sort of 9 topics there with a couple of, I'm sort of thinking about the resource constraints as well. And with a couple of topics are chosen as prioritize them and, have a go at a few topics first, a bit like the COVID ones we did over the last 18 months or a bit before that. And you sort of do one at a time and progress like that. I'm just concerned about the resource constraints, Chair.
Thank you for mentioning that, Jana. Rich?
I think I have a similar concern that was just raised, but these 9 topics, have their questions actually come in on each of these 9 topics? And are we proposing in the NAM that we're going to, I guess, I don't know, provide waivers for some of these things, or just remind people of their professional obligation? And if it's the latter, I'm wondering whether all 9 of them, you need to wait to get all 9 of them out at once, just to be given the staff demands. But pause there.
Thank you, Rich. Ken, please.
Thank you, Chair Diaz. I guess my reaction and probably need some additional reflection working with the IUC and Vanya. In terms of the level of effort in putting together that sort of document, especially in light of what Chana has said, would it make sense to tackle whatever number of topics we have on the screen? And by the way, these are just illustrative topics. They are not meant to be a comprehensive or complete list. They're just examples of areas to think or consider about highlighting. But whether it's going to take us or be more efficient to deal with those 9 topics or a dozen topics in installments compared with dealing with all of them in one go, I think jury's a bit out on this question. My experience is that it's a lot more efficient to deal with one document in one go than to basically put it through a sort of sausage making process, as it were, over a number of months. Because every time you do something and pause and then come back to it again, it just the effort that it takes to restart sort of the engine going again, it does bring an amount of efficiency to the process. So I think it needs some reflection as to what would be the most efficient way to deal with it. And I would say let's take that back and talk about it in the IEC. Vanya would be my suggestion, but let's not jump to a conclusion that there's only one way to deal with it. And maybe to Sadia's earlier suggestion, I would also suggest that the IEC just kind of think about it, Sadia, because whilst I can see some merit in taking a more generic approach, if you will, or a more thematic approach of highlighting relevant issues whenever there is market dislocation, as here. The downside is we lose a bit of the specificity in really drawing stakeholders' attention to really what is the issue we're trying to deal with here. And that is sort of the as I say, a bit of the drawback that we need to weigh. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I would like to say something, but I see that we have Caroline, and I'll come after. Caroline, please.
Thanks, Chair. I do agree with Chana, and maybe we can consider working with professional accountancy organizations that, especially those in EU and UK, that might have felt this a greater impact of this, and I think the key is one of the key things is the unprecedented sanctions regime that has been introduced not just by one or two jurisdictions, but multiple jurisdictions, and the impact of that, and some of that sanctions includes sanctions on the provision of accounting, auditing, and tax services, which is really in the space that we work in. So I think if there is a need to try to focus and not cover everything, that might be a good place to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your suggestion, Caroline. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm very supportive of this initiative. My thought is timeliness is probably more important, and specificity, as Ken also said, is more important at this point than trying to think of a long series of papers, as was done with COVID. COVID was a sort of an evolving situation. This situation has evolved, and I mean, it's, one could argue, worsening, right, day by day. But I think that the impact of what's going on is probably quite foreseeable in terms of what's happening, and there is a more urgency around this issue, I think. And I'm not sure about I mean, it's obviously subject to staff resourcing, right, in terms of how that can be done, but it doesn't seem to me to necessitate a series of documents. I think that there's sufficient that could be done in a singular or two documents or something along those lines, but I think timeliness is important.
Thank you, Brian. Any other comments? Well, this that I'm going to say probably is not very relevant, but I'd like to, for the sake of full information to the board, is that this topic was raised more than once, I'd say many times, in our outreach activities in London and after that in the United States. The firms, professional organizations and stakeholders in general are concerned about the impacts of the war on the accountancy profession. And so grateful to the IEIOC that has identified the topic and made some suggestions in that direction. I would say from what we've heard here that there is no opposition to the fact that this should be addressed as a matter of concern for professional accountants and by IESBA. The question here is more how. Of course, the resources constraint is a fact, and we have talked about it extensively yesterday. I think thank you for the constructive suggestions to how it could be feasible without involving much resources and much time. I agree that this is urgent. If we're going to address this topic next year, it's not going to be relevant, and others will do it before us. So it's a matter of doing it now or not at all, I would say. So I think that with these valuable contributions, the working group could take these proposals or these suggestions on board and see how to make it work. If we could make a decision here that in principle there will be some documents, some work, some thing being issued, because I think we cannot wait for September to make a decision on whether to do or not to do. It's going to be too late. If you give the working group the confidence to deal with this the best way, being aware of the resources and everything that has been said, and possibly informing the board in between about any follow-up considerations or thoughts, I think could be a way of addressing this. But of course, happy to discuss a different approach if this is the case. Well, so Vanya, thank you very much, and you can move to the next topic.
Thank you, Gabriela. The next topic is an update. I would ask Mark first to give us an update about the consultation on audit market reforms in UK, and then I will speak a little bit about Martha's contribution about the same thing in the European community. Mark, please.
Thank you, Vanya. So after an impossibly long period of waiting, we now have the publication of a government response which sets out the policy positions it intends to legislate for, looking at reform in the UK on corporate governance, corporate reporting and audit. So you'll be aware of the fact the government put out a white policy paper which was setting out their intended direction of travel. They received over 600 responses to that. This now sets out the sort of the next steps. Government recognises that they will have to legislate for a number of those things. It will be a mixture of things that require primary legislation, secondary legislation, and things that we already can do under existing powers with code standards and guidance. So the main thing is finally we will see the FRC transition into ARGA, a new regulator with stronger statutory powers and also statutory funding to support that work. We've grown from an organisation that I joined in 2015 of about 140 people up to about 420 now. We expect by the end of this financial year to be up to about 480, and our sort of end state will be about 570, reflecting a significant expansion of our work. One of the quite subtle changes that was in the reform package is that under existing legislation, we are required to delegate to the professional bodies, so the professional accountancy bodies in the UK, matters that relate to non-public interest entities. That ministerial direction has been withdrawn. So therefore, we no longer are required to delegate to professional accountancy bodies. And the immediate consequence of that is we will be taking back from the professional bodies the registration of public interest entity auditors, which in theory would allow the FRC to take action to remove the registration of a public interest entity auditor, which is currently an obligation that sits with the professional bodies. And that comes into effect from the 31st of July this year. Main sort of missed opportunity is that we will not have a UK internal controls regime, not a Sarbanes-Oxley regime like they have here in the US. We think that's a missed opportunity. I will look at ways in which we can possibly try and close that gap through the UK Corporate Governance Code. The big change is that at the moment, our public interest entities meeting the European Commission definition, which we inherited through the audit regulation and directive in 2016. The government will add to that large private companies. So large private companies that have in excess of 750 employees and over 750 million of turnover. So we expect that to create between 700 and 800 additional public interest entities that will be subject to direct regulation, and the auditors will of course be subject to our regulation and inspection. In due course, there will be legislation to create a more level playing field. So at the moment, we have quite strong statutory powers in respect of audit standard setting, an ability to inspect audit work, and where we need to take enforcement action against auditors. At the moment, there is not an equal framework for action against professional accountants and for directors who are not members. Government proposes to address that. And we're working with them to look at a similar regime to our audit enforcement procedure that would allow us to take action against accountants and also directors who are not members in business. We currently do have powers in respect of accountants, but they are under agreement with the professional bodies and they are subject to a higher threshold test, so a misconduct test rather than the failure to meet relevant requirements. So those will be significant changes. Directors will also see additional disclosure requirements in annual reports. The audit and assurance policy that Donald Brydon proposed, setting out areas where they propose to commission assurance beyond the audit of the financial statements and the annual report. A disclosure requirement on directors to say what they've done to protect the organisation from fraud, and also heightened disclosure requirements around the payment of dividends and capital maintenance to ensure that a company is not paying out dividends that it can't afford to pay, which therefore threaten its viability. The other thing I suppose that is particularly significant is that the government is proposing steps that will make the UK audit market more diverse. So therefore, to bring in additional players, particularly in the large FTSE audit market, that is something that I believe will take a significant amount of time, because we have, of course, in common with other jurisdictions, the big four audit firms. We then have some challenger firms that are growing in size. But then really below that top 7 firms, we then go down to a number of quite small audit firms. And therefore, one of the challenges the regulator will have is how to grow additional capacity lower in the market to take on work and to make sure that can happen. That will also see a legislative requirement introduced to build on the work that we've already done, where in the UK, the largest 4 audit firms have effectively operationally separated their audit practice from the wider business. It's a virtual separation, it's not a physical separation. So they maintain a single legal entity, but that will be backed up by a power in law and also powers to strengthen the resilience of the audit market. The other things within the The other things within that sort of package is regulation of actuaries will move onto a statutory basis. At the moment, it's a voluntary regime, so that will move onto a statutory basis. And we will also regulate the local public audit market, so effectively the audit of public authorities in the UK through a new role that will come through legislation. So those are really sort of a broad heading. In terms of likely timing, there is not going to be a bill in this calendar year, so this session of Parliament. The government has committed that it will draft a bill that it will then issue for pre-legislative scrutiny, which in theory should speed up the passing of legislation later on. So we're looking to see when that comes out in the autumn, and that will set out then the detailed requirements and what the law proposes to say, and it will be subject to parliamentary approval. So it has been a very long and convoluted process. We are sort of finally there. In the next few weeks, we'll be setting out steps that the FRC will take in advance of that to develop and address particular issues that are set out in the government's response, which require changes to our code standards and guidance more widely. And we'll be working on that over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. So a period of quite significant change. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. Very interesting. Galen, please.
Mark, could you remind us on where the FRC is with firm rotation?
So at the moment we have, this is where it begins to all get confusing. So for public interest entities, using the EU definition, we have a 10+10. So 10-year mandatory, then you have to do a retendering. You can appoint the same firm for a further 10-year period, but at the end of 20 years, you have to appoint a new firm, and that applies to all public interest entities. New public interest entities, which are large private companies, will not be required to tender and rotate.
So the 10 years, we haven't come to the end of that yet, obviously, right? I don't know when that started.
Well, in theory, it started in 2016, but we already had a sort of voluntary regime prior to that through the Corporate Governance Code and through an order issued by the Competition and Markets Authority. So in practice, we've been running a tendering and rotation scheme since about 2012. So what we're doing now is we're seeing a number of rotations coming through where people are where companies are reaching the end of their 10-year period, or indeed companies are reaching the end of a 20-year period because we look back, and therefore you are seeing rotation in the market. And of course, there is a complexity, and I'll give an example. For instance, there are a number of global US headquartered banks that have UK public interest entity subsidiaries. So the UK pie is required to tender, but of course there is no tendering and rotation requirement in the US. So the group auditor remains the same. And that's something that is common with the position in the rest of Europe. But so we are seeing quite a spike in activity at the moment.
Well, overall feeling pretty comfortable with where you're at with that. I mean, it sounds to me like moving forward.
It is moving forward. I think that the challenge is that it's very clear in a number of areas that audit firms are quite rightly asking questions about whether or not they tender for the audit of entities that they might see as having poor internal control, having a higher risk of resulting in an audit where there are material issues, or indeed even entities that might be reputationally more risky. And so therefore we are seeing areas of the market where you're seeing tender activity and it is more challenging to be able to make an auditor appointment. And I expect that will continue. It is resulting in some change to the shape of the market, with audit firms coming in and picking up some engagements that perhaps they would never have previously won. And I think also, and it's probably a global issue as well, is we are seeing, particularly on the back of the pandemic, most audit firms being capacity constrained. And I think there are some hard resourcing decisions about, what work can a firm accommodate, what can it take on? Because we've come out of the pandemic with quite an overhang, a backlog of work. And therefore, firms are quite rightly focused on clearing that before they inherit new responsibilities.
That's very interesting. Ken, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just had a question regarding your comment, Mark, about the new org having now or prospectively the powers of enforcement over, let's say, corporate directors who are not professional accountants in business. And I guess my question is in two parts. First of all, how would the enforcement work or operate, or against which rules, so to speak? Would the enforcement be against the legislative responsibilities or the legal responsibilities of the corporate directors, or would they be subject to a code of ethics, for example? And I guess the second part of my question is, maybe it's not so much a question or as opposed to an observation, and that observation is more that this could be an example of how a regulator would fulfill that role that we've discussed at this board about the need for an enforcement dimension when we think about the potential enlargement of the scope and bringing in other players in the corporate reporting ecosystem to come within some sort of codes of conduct or ethical codes. And that, just kind of illustrates to me that there is a role for legislatures, and there is a role for the appropriate regulators to come in with the appropriate sort of enforcement mechanism.
So it's an interesting one, Ken. The devil's in the detail, I'd say. The intention, I believe, that the government has set out is for there to be a level playing field where there are consistent enforcement regimes for auditors, for accountants, and for non-member directors. And in particular, that is a reflection of the fact that if you were the CFO of a company and you were a member of a professional accountancy body, and we took enforcement action against you and you resigned your membership, we can no longer take enforcement action. So therefore, this now brings the scope of enforcement action to include non-member directors. At the moment, there are various provisions in company law. We will have to see whether the government sets criteria in law against which directors are assessed. At the moment, in our audit enforcement procedure, where we take enforcement action against auditors, it's because they breach a relevant requirement, be it in an IESBA, be it in our auditing standard, our ethical standard for auditors, or be it the code. If you want a similar regime, there is an argument that you have to think about having a similar framework of relevant requirements to be able to take action against. But that is obviously something that we'll see when government develops its legislation. I think the other thing is, at the moment, again, we've got this thing where we've got a failure of relevant requirements for auditors. We've got a misconduct test for accountants, which is higher. And then we've got nothing at all really for non-member directors. So this is about creating a level playing field, and not just having a situation where you have quite a mature and established framework of enforcing against auditors, but a much weaker framework for taking enforcement action against people who may well have had a significant role to play in a corporate failure. And that's why I think the idea of a UK internal controls regime is a missed opportunity, because that would have given real teeth to a way of determining whether or not you have a basis to take action against a director who is not a member in business.
If I may, Ken, following up on your question, Of course, if you know, I'm Portuguese, and Portugal is not a reference because it's a very small country. But just to tell you that these developments in the UK framework, part of them, or almost all, are already included in the Portuguese auditors framework. Namely, this provision that takes non-professional accountants as being as responsible and as subject to the same rules as the others. And this is so since January this year, after a revision of the law. The law was put in force in 2016 after the European regulation was entered into force. But there was a provision in the law that was included on purpose because everything was new and a little bit uncertain, that the law should be subject to a revision in 3 years' time. And one of the revisions, one of the results was exactly to include those non-professionals in the same rules. Non-professionals, I'm not saying it clearly, members of the board, directors, top directors. And this is so because we had concrete cases, scandals, corporate failures, namely one bank, etc., where some professionals in the firms lost their license, but the ones from where the guidance and the orientations and the tone from the top was coming were not subject to the same enforcement actions because they were not professional accountants. This is not completely new. I think that in Netherlands they have the same provisions already because they've come to the conclusion that if we are talking about changing the culture of the firms, the tone coming from the top, etc., it's not appropriate, and it's not does not create a level playing field if you have someone, a CEO who is not an accountant, providing guidance, and the accountants having to, of course they have this ethical. So I think this is the rationale of this development. So if there are any other comments, there are no other comments. I don't know, Mark, if you want to add anything.
No, I don't think there's anything to add, Gabriella. Okay. We'll obviously see how the proposals are developed. It may be that when it comes to, say, our December meeting, we might be in a position to do something again as an update of where things are going and what the likely timing of those reforms is.
Thank you. Vanya, back to you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Mark. What I'll be doing right now is just an update for your information about the public consultation that the European Commission has installed in order to strengthen the quality of corporate reporting in Europe, dealing with 3 pillars that they consider important: corporate governance, auditing, and supervision, both of the entity in charge of reporting and the auditors. The objectives of this consultation was to improve the quality of corporate reporting and its enforcement, to increase the investors' protection, and to improve the depth of attractiveness of the single market of capital in the European Union region. They launched these public consultations and tried to hear from companies, auditors, public authorities, asset managers, and retail investors and civil societies in general. The document that was used for this consultation, wow. Yes, no, not go, yes, yeah, here. The document was under public audience until February. We do not yet have the result of that, but they received responses from over 200 stakeholders, and they are compiling the answers in order to make some kind of pronunciation of fact-finding compilation for the public. And we understand that it is important for us at the IOC to follow that. We are not bringing here those aspects in regulation in Europe concerning sustainability, because we understand that that now is under the sustainability working group, including the possibility of independent auditors that are in charge of financial statements to deal with the sustainability report as well. That will be done under the sustainability working group. We are just bringing this consultation about the corporate reporting directive. And I think that's it. Yeah. A last comment about that is that there is no commitment from the European Parliament to bring the result of this consultation into a new legislation. They are just studying the possibilities and trying to find out what is there in order to establish their future strategy in this. So it was just for your information, on something that will be having in the radar. They received a large number of responses, and mainly from France. Christelle, congratulations. You've been quite active in that. 23% of the response came from France, and the others were very well distributed. And that's it. About the other topics that IOC have a look at. When we were discussing a possible agenda last March, it was called our attention to the fact that whenever we have an outreach, not necessarily we have a balanced distribution of responses. So countries that are outside the jurisdiction of the G20, for example, have a very lower level of response to the consultations. And so we are also open to suggestions from the board, from jurisdiction, for how can we improve that? How can we tap other levels of stakeholders, other jurisdictions, in order to let them know that their opinion will be taken into consideration and that is worthwhile for them to help us to have a good diagnosis for that. And other things that we are also monitoring is the results from the COVID-19, of course, and the Ukraine, as we proposed at the beginning, and the questions in connection to independence challenges arising from this new model that was introduced mainly by COVID, that is the remote hybrid work relationship instead of face-to-face working environment. And we are also studying the possibility of dealing with impact of high inflation on the ethical side of the work of both preparers and auditors, and how the market read the financial statements as a result of that. And finally, to connect with the technology working group in relation to cryptocurrencies, if it is worthwhile for us to generate something together. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Vanya. Reactions to these topics and suggestions? Laurie, please.
I'm on this working group, so I agree with everything that's on this list. But I do, yes, of course. Vanya always makes sure that we land the plane before she gets her slides out. But the cryptocurrency thing interests me. I mean, look, it's hard to not watch what's going on right now in the marketplace in the crypto space. But I'm thinking more broadly of the whole disruptive technology issues. And I wonder for us as a board strategically, if we need to think about building sometime on a future agenda, some or in a way day, or I don't know what we could do to really focus on things like AI and crypto. It's a much more future type thing. But I do not feel, and I must tell you, and I know I see everything going on. I know there's been an AI communication that went out, and I read that, and I think it's very good, but it's much bigger than that, right? Because in terms of the types of technology that the firms and businesses will be using and how much AI is in that, when I look at crypto, I do not think these are big strategic issues, and I certainly don't know that as a board we've landed on what are the future ethical considerations around those. And when might those be coming at us so that we can think about how we phase those? This may tie with our strategy survey and analysis and how we ultimately get at that. But I don't know that we know enough to even phase our approach to that and how we think about it. So I'll pause there. I don't know, I'm looking at Brian because I know Brian's thinking about these things and talking to people, but they're big issues. And when I see the crypto stuff bubbling, I'm like, ooh, you know, there are ethical issues around that, clearly.
Thank you very, very much, Laurie, for sharing your thoughts. Brian?
Have no choice, do I? Yeah, no, we're certainly thinking about those. But I mean, something I'll mention just around crypto specifically, because that's an item on here. And it's not that we shouldn't do something about it and think more about it and so on. But during the phase one of the TWG work, crypto was something that came up and really in discussion with stakeholders. And again, based on the research that was done and our own internal discussions, yes, there's ethics issues, but are they ethics issues that go above and beyond what's already in the code? And in that sense, the determination was no, it doesn't look like that is something that needs to be specifically addressed. Could more work be done, right? Could there be more guidance that's provided? Again, tying those different pieces together, absolutely, right? And then that's a function of resources that we want to devote to that, or that we can convince other organizations to devote to if it's seen as a priority. And it's, I mean, frankly, it's seen as an important issue, but it's never risen to the point of saying, you know what, professional accountants need guidance specifically around how to deal with crypto from an ethics perspective. Not reporting, not assurance issues and different things like that, which can also come up, but just in terms of how to address some of the ethics around that. On your education point, stay tuned for tomorrow's presentation. That is one of the things that we're going to be recommending continue in terms of board education, because you're right. I mean, in order for the board to be able to make decisions around, is this something that should be codified or is it or not, or is it something that we should produce NAM on or not? You have to have a sufficient level of understanding of these different technologies and a bit of a sense of a crystal ball of where this might be going and how professional accountants will interact with these technologies and how workplaces will be disrupted, so that you really can make that decision, right? And you're not just relying on a tech working group or EIOC or whoever to sort of say, here's kind of the recommendation. So all of us we all have to upskill that. And that's, I mean, that's just the reality, right? And we have to continue to upskill. So, but thanks.
Thank you very much, Brian. Felicia?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Vanya, for a very good presentation. In what you mentioned is one aspect of outreach activities to non-G20 countries, which I think makes a lot of sense. If you look at most of the comments and feedback from the audience or the people that are supposed to be giving comments, they come from either Europe or America or Australia. I think it's something that the board has started looking at, which is good. But my question is the task force looking for comments or maybe suggestions on how to do this? Maybe out of this, we could also give our views, maybe outside the board. The other is, I was thinking of maybe if there could be examples and sometimes case studies that are picked from non-G20 countries, so that when people and different jurisdictions are looking at comments from IESBA, then they can also get inspiration from such cases. I think that would be good. The other thing is maybe if there could be more coordination from IESBA with non-G20 countries, I think that would make a lot of sense for especially the developing world, where the profession is still growing and coming up. If I look at from where we are in this part of Africa, every day we see the number of students doing professional courses growing, be it ACCA, be it CPAs. There are different CPA forums across the region. So I think a lot of coordination from either IESBA or IFAC and other standard setting bodies would be very good. A case in point, we've seen ACCA in East Africa is very, very proactive in that there are even groups for ACCA forums within our region. So I think that could be a coordination that we could do between IESBA and ACCA and other bodies that have influence in this region. So I think there's a way we can do it, but we need to be proactive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicia. Rich.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering if, as I looked at this watch list, are there some matters that might be more urgent than others? And what I mean by that is, I noticed this comment about matters arising from the impact of high inflation. Have specific issues been identified? And if so, should those be moved to a higher priority since inflation is here? Or is it just a more broad concept that you're watching for issues to emerge? Because it's a little hard to, that and even that remote hybrid work, it's been around for a while. I'm frankly not all that, not aware of most any issue on the independent side caused by that. I think there could be some ethics issues, but I don't know what you're hearing as the specific questions. And then are you thinking about suggesting code change, or are you suggesting non-authoritative material or thought leadership articles on these topics?
Thank you, Brian. Vanya, any reaction from your side?
Yes, thank you. First, Felician, yes, we would very much welcome suggestions and some solutions that you think will help us to study a way of getting the non-G20 jurisdictions more involved with the due process. About the cryptocurrencies, Brian, the idea is just for us to decide what to do. I think that and if it was a result of the phase one of the technology task force, maybe we should stress that and spread this knowledge and make people know that we have addressed that. Let's discuss it maybe together with Rich as well and Mark, that was the one to put this on our table, and I think he's right. There are some issues that we should have a look at, and then establish the better procedure for that. The watch list that we have reached is the result of the last meeting, exactly that. And I agree with you. I think that we do not have answers here. What we are to propose is exactly the topics that we want to hear from you, if you should address them or not, in which way, if you have some kind of guidance that we should use to do that. But we are open to suggestions, and we do not have the answer if there is the necessity of changing the code or not, because we did not yet start to address these topics. Okay.
Right, Ken.
Thank you, Chair Diaz. Just some quick thoughts in reaction to what's been raised. Felicia, to your suggestion to more open to initiatives reaching out outside of the G20, absolutely. But I would maybe make the connection to Gabriela's opening remarks at the beginning of this meeting, which is that all board members are ambassadors for IESBA. And to the extent you have connections within your particular jurisdictions, by all means, explore the avenues for interaction and how we can bring to life and raise awareness about the role of the code and the importance of the ethics standards and the independence standards. And then just reach out to us. You know, how can we help? We have materials, we have presentations. We can look for speakers if necessary, but we do need board members who are in the particular jurisdictions or in the particular sort of locales and context to let us know where the needs are and how we can help, because we can facilitate. On the topic of cryptocurrency, I would perhaps just raise an element of caution that we have to be careful we don't react to the element of sensationalism that's attached to developments in the area or in the realm of cryptocurrency, because especially in recent weeks, as the market for cryptocurrency has essentially gone south, there have been quite a few headlines about investors having, if you will, bet the house and lost quite a tidy sum. And it's important that the board doesn't react to events like this, because there's an element of herd mentality that is attached whenever there's a latest market fad, and really that we focus on what really are the ethical dimension or the ethical issues. And that maybe brings me to my final point, which is that, and maybe that goes maybe to Richard's question, how can EIOC be more nimble and alert in terms of identifying the right issues to bring to the board? And to that, it's important to understand the role of the IOC. The IOC is effectively the antenna for the board. It is a group that's got its eyes and its feet on the ground, and it is out there kind of doing the environmental scan to identify what are the issues to bring to the board's attention. But AIC cannot do it by itself. And within the structure of the AIC and within the approach that we built into the terms of reference for AIC, we have a very specific specific element which goes to the effect that the board members and board participants at large are in effect the foot soldiers as well. And to the extent that you, from your vantage points, from your individual circumstances, your contexts in which you're working, you identify specific issues that you believe are sufficiently important, that there ought to be some element of consideration, whether by EOC or ultimately by the board, do bring those to the IOC's attention, because that's a group that is the right group to consider all the inputs, and we'll do the appropriate triage and do the assessment of importance and determine what to bring to the board's attention, and indeed if there are any particular recommendations to put forward for board consideration. So it's an encouragement, in effect, that is what I'm saying, that do keep your eyes and ears open on the ground, and as you identify issues that you feel are sufficiently important or critical, route those to Vanya's group, and they will do whatever they need to do on their side to do the appropriate analysis, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. It's exactly that. Robert.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a brief intervention from me on this. This is obviously a very important session. It's very important for any board, isn't it, to look up from the detail of the work and get into the helicopter, and that's what the IOC is helping you to do. So it's very good. It enables the board then to look at how it can be proactive in considering topics that can impact on the IESBA strategy and the public interest. So very good to see. I wanted to say it's very good to see the board being responsive on the Ukraine situation. Clearly, there are some concerns being expressed about that. And there are a number of topics on the list which do seem to impact the ethical aspects of the audit. I see reference to liability caps, rotation, independence rules. So a number of those are already covered by the code, but it is important to keep them under review. And I presume that's the role of the committee, or the EIOC to do that. And it may be, as has been said, that the code is already sufficient on some of the matters, but there may be areas which can be followed up. I'd just like to reinforce the point that Ken has just made in response to Felicia's comment about non-G20 countries. I think that's a very important point. PIOB is very aware of the need to look at the global public interest from a global perspective. And of course, this board is a global board, and it does need to be responsive on issues that fall outside the mainstream. And just there was perhaps an example of that with the recent LCE conference, Less Complex Entities Standard Conference, which the IAASB ran in Paris just recently, where there was a very powerful session at the end of that conference with an Africa and a development perspective. And I think it really just reinforced the significance of the work that the IAASB is doing on that topic, not from a solely developed country point of view, but from a global perspective and a development perspective. So I think that was a very important point. I'd like to reinforce that. So thank you for the opportunity to talk, and congratulations to the EIOC for the work being done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Robert. Mark.
Thank you. Just to pick up really on Rich's comment, I think that one of the challenges we currently have is almost like a recalibration. And what I mean by that is that when we went through the pandemic, we were in very exceptional circumstances. And obviously, IESBA developed a lot of guidance for practitioners to address the ethical implications of the pandemic. We did it certainly in the UK on a jurisdictional level. But that was very exceptional. And what I find now is I get a lot of pushback where people say, well, there's the conflict in Ukraine, are you going to issue guidance? There's inflation, are you going to issue guidance? And we push back quite hard because actually the pandemic was genuinely exceptional. We have to sort of be able to recalibrate between the generic demand for something and the specifically in the context of this event, where do we need to act? And I think there's a bit of a balancing act at the moment, because I think there's a tendency for the first line of response to be the standard setter or the regulator must do something before the person demanding it has actually fully understood what particular aspect they really need help with, rather than can you write some generic guidance on what to do with a war zone?
Thank you, Mark. Laurie.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, but I would layer a thought process on top of that that says, and maybe it's not even related to guidance as opposed to communication. Okay, I do think when we think about IESBA and one of our roles in outreach and relevance of the code, there may be easy ways we can communicate on topics that and without stressing staffing levels. If there are value add easy ways that we can tie elements of the code to current events, I do think it's something the board should be considering from a strategic standpoint in terms of relevance, positioning of IESBA, continued sustained focus, because I think one of our challenges, which is always the case with a standard setter or where you have a code in place, is how do you bring that to life to the community? So I think it's just, I think that's something, there's that balance. But Mark, I completely agree. You have to have something to say that is specific and ties to, otherwise it's not worth doing, right? We can't just do it for optics. But if there is, then I think it's probably worth a board discussion on that at some point. You know, how do we want to define that balance and play that? I do think there is value in that, because I do think the relevance aspect and bringing the code to life using topical current events is a potentially attractive option.
Thank you, Laurie, for that. Brian?
Yeah, I just want to echo those comments, Laurie, and indicate that it's well supported by the About IESBA page that we have up, where we've got 2 very short paragraphs, and some of the stuff we're meant to be doing, or that we claim that we're doing, then so we should do them, is promoting good ethical practices globally, fostering international debate on ethical issues faced by accounts. So that's a pretty broad mandate. So it does go beyond just the strictly speaking issues that we face. So yeah, I think we have a role to play, especially as an international body.
Thank you, Brian. Mark, do you want to come in again? Okay, and Robert, do you want to come in again?
No, thank you, Chair, but I agree. I think what's just been said, it's important. So the global board, global mandate, and of course, only say things and work on things and devote the resources when there's something to say. But keeping the awareness of the issues and keeping the focus on the code and how can this impact the public interest is the standpoint to come at it from. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Christelle.
Going back to what Laurie just said and reflecting on 2 items which we could consider are not new in the world, a war zone and a high inflation. We already had that. The problem is the pace of whom the actors are impacted potentially. Maybe more than ever, but so the fallback analysis to me is there something new in these that we didn't address and were very difficult to address in ethical terms? Yeah, but why would we address high inflation in OECD if we did not address high inflation in South America? You see what I mean? So if there is something specific that and that has some merits to communicate on, maybe it's worth it. Otherwise, I'm a little shocked that if some events impact OECD, we would react, and if there's nothing new under the umbrella.
Thank you, Christelle. Vanya.
I think that the question here is much more in the connection of communication than changing the code itself. When we think of this kind of situation as something that is already in the code and so nothing should be done, we are under the presumption that everyone knows the code, and that is not so. So I think we should look at these kind of situations like opportunities to make the markets aware of what is already in the code and make it, use it as a tool to spread knowledge about the code and help people to navigate on the code to deal with this kind of circumstances.
Thank you, Vanya. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much for the presentation and for the reflection that it reflects behind the presentation at the group level, at the EIOC level, which is, as we can see, of utmost importance. Vanya was telling me before this session that it was going to be very short and very quick. And I said, not sure about that. And what we have seen is that it was not that short, and we could keep on talking because also because we didn't manage to get to some conclusions, but the discussion around table shows the importance and the need for us to have these opportunities to share these kind of thoughts and more strategical approach to what we are doing here as a board, and where do we want to go and how. So even if we did not manage to get a conclusion about what should the EIOC address, and I'll come to that point after, I think it's very important for us to have this opportunity. And I take note of the Laurie's suggestion to organize a Huawei Day on technology. We could possibly organize a Huawei Day on the metaverse, which should be consistent with the topic. Because I'm joking, but it's yeah, to be up to the change. So what can we take from this session alongside this very interesting and lively and honest positioning of the members towards these provocations, let's call it like that. It's important, it's relevant. We are always telling, I'm always telling, and you are always telling that IESBA wants to embrace change, and that we are aware and must be aware of the context and of the changes. This is exactly what the EIOC the EIOC mandates, and what the EIOC, as we have seen, is doing. I think that the only concrete conclusion is that the EIOC will address this Ukraine issue and see what if it is necessary, how necessary, which are the topics, how can we do it and balance it with the resources. This was the conclusion, with a clear mandate and confidence of the board for the IOC to move forward with this the best possible way, informing the board of the progresses. On the other topics, I would say that we didn't have any consistent views, because for some of you, some of them are more important than the others. For some of you, some of them cannot be important. And I think that what it shows is the importance of digging a little bit more into each one of these topics, which for me are all important. I can make a choice between them. They are all important. Having in consideration what Ken said about these cryptocurrencies linked risks of appearing as a little bit going with the flow. So feeling like we have to do something. On inflation, I'm not saying that we have to do something. I think that the only thing that we can't do is ignore that this is a big change in the context, which triggers big economic changes. We have the inflation, we have the changes in the treasuries and central banks policies with respect to monetary policies, but also the change in what is changing with regard to these long-lasting low interest rates, which will have huge impacts in the financial market, but also in the private debt, savings, etc. And so it is possible that what we have in the code applies as such, that it's not necessary to do anything, but it may happen that we have to do something, namely in terms of communication. And I will come to my last point. Communication has been mentioned here many times, and I think that it could be part of our reflection in our future Away Day in the metaverse. Reflect about which kind of communications we want to have, what means communicating in a professional way. And as Brian mentioned, this is part of our mandate to spread the message, to make sure that what we do is valuable and is useful. And for that, people have to know what we are doing and understand that. So this is also part, possibly, proposal for our future reflection, but not for today. Vanya, I would say, but if you have any other take away from this meeting, that the mandate for you, alongside thanking you for these very provocative and the very well identified topics, is to go a little bit to dig a little bit and see which of these topics merit can possibly merit some further work, in which direction and how, and come back with to the board with some suggestions. Okay, Christelle, do you want to comment? So. Thank you very much. If there are no other comments or suggestions on this topic, we would move now to the next and last topic of our agenda this morning. A little bit late, we are a few minutes late, but I think we are still with the necessary energy, not only to face this, but to, if necessary, delay a little bit the lunchtime. And I'll give the floor to Sadia to update us on the IESB and IESBA coordination, which is a very important topic and is getting even more important as we advance in some topics, as we have seen here, that need this straight coordination. Sadia, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I was going to promise a short update, but I've learned from Vanya. I'll promise a direct and engaging update instead. When we consider coordination, it's easy to compare the strategic objective to a production or an intricate choreography. The months of planning, selection, and appreciation for the actor's role and responsibility, and then finally setting the production in motion. But sometimes these productions are on the scale of Broadway, and sometimes they are a school theatrical production. Both are equally important, but we can agree that the level, time, and resources are differing scale. And this is important to keep in mind when we go through the journey of coordination between the IESB and IESBA. So the board received the last formal update on coordination in March 2021. That might seem like a long time ago, but have no doubt the team at chairman, task force, working group, and especially staff level have been very active and invested in coordination activities. At this meeting, we'll be providing you an update on the ongoing and potential projects that require coordination. But maybe this is the time that we reflect on some of our past achievements. In the last 2 years, we celebrated the recent approval of the conforming amendments to the IESBA code relating to the IESB quality management project, as well as objectivity of the engagement quality reviewer. Both of these projects were completed in line with the effective date of the IESB standard, and both of them required exposure. So it was a lot of work. On our agenda in this meeting, which kind of made my job a lot easier, is we've already received an update on the PI rollout working group and the IESB current project. And we'll be hearing from the IESBA task force relating to the definition of engagement team tomorrow, which is a product of coordination with the ISA 600 group project. So how do we do coordination? Luckily, we have a blueprint. And this blueprint is called the coordination framework. The coordination framework sets out many things, but it's based on 6 operating principles. The first one is proactive collaboration in a transparent and timely communication with the standard setting boards. We look at the nature, scope, complexity of projects and the degree of urgency. There's a coordination of the commitment. There's a commitment by the standard setting boards to seek to resolve different views with good faith. There's a need for flexibility because as projects progress, there might be unforeseen issues that needed, and there's good judgment. We also have to respect the independence of each of the standard setting boards to set their standards pursuant to their limits, and there's mutual respect. Some coordination activities are done at a staff level. Others are significant enough to be discussed at a task force or a working group level, and sometimes there might be a need to share this information at the board plenary session. In the past, we've also celebrated some significant strategic objectives, like the joint standard setting and the national standard setters joint session. We had joint plenary sessions, and then there's a coordination of the strategic work plan between the standard setting boards. But the detail of this information on the next slide will give you a snapshot of a coordination working group. This is just a first page of an Excel worksheet of which has 18 tabs that go on about the different past, present, and upcoming future projects that require coordination. So there's a combination of these projects either being led by the IESBA or by the IAASB. In this detailed workbook that are maintained at the staff level, it includes notes of each of the projects requiring coordination, the individuals supporting it, the responsibilities, and the key deliverables. It's also important to note that one work stream might have multiple coordination links. So one project might be linked to several different projects on the other standard setting board. Early identification of coordination is imperative, and the board and staff have been diligent in identifying this year at a project proposal level. But as the project continues, regular communication on the need to recommit to this is very important as well. While this level is not shared at a board level, this database of information is a subject of a liaison call. So that's a call between the IESBA and the IAASB liaison members, of which is maintained by staff. So during the last quarter, the IAASB and the IESBA liaison calls take place on a quarterly basis. We are supported by Carla and Ken, but each staff member actually takes responsibility for coordination issues, depending on the task force or working group that they're involved on. In addition to these calls, in the last 2 quarters, there have been calls at staff level in relation to sustainability, audit evidence, and listed entities and PIEs. So there's a lot of detail on coordination that we don't see, but we trust that is being taken care on a day-to-day basis. The list of IAASB projects that require coordination, we currently have 6. They are namely fraud, sustainability, going concern, audit of less complex entities, listed entities and PIEs, and audit evidence. As can be expected, some of the timing issues are still to be determined. Some are ongoing and some are yet to still begin. So we wait for the lead in the project to tell us when these items are ready for the coordination. And the staff actually update staff from a staff level to a staff level as these progress. So we haven't yet heard information about fraud, going concern, and audit evidence since project proposal level, but as these progress, we will gain insight into what level of coordination is required from the IESBA. The next slide is the IESBA work plan and the 3 projects that we currently have for coordination efforts. It's no surprise that all 3 of these are already on the agenda, and we can trust that these are taking place on a timely basis. But it's good to keep the board informed. Coordination between the standard setting boards benefits the public interest in a number of ways. It improves efficiency with overlapping efforts. It allows for timely standard setting, and the closely aligned standards make it easier to use. I hope that you keep this in mind as you embark on your next coordination activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadia. Comments from the board, questions? Well, if there aren't any comments, Vanya, please.
I'd just like to thank Sadia for the presentation. I think that it is very important that the standard setter bodies communicate among themselves, because if they work on an isolated basis, the end result is that a standard produced by one will not deal or be linked to the other, which can cause uncertainty in the market and the professional accountants. So thank you for bringing that and for the work that you do.
Sure, Vanya. Caroline.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Sadia, for the presentation and update on the coordination, the projects that are under coordination. Just reflecting back on what Mark had said on sustainability and how we are looking to maybe align or coincide with IESB on the timing of their sustainability project. I'm just wondering whether, is there room for us to be thinking, approaching coordination slightly differently? Because if I reflect back on the other projects, we would wait for one board to develop, what their ideas are and the proposals are before the other board starts its project and looks at conforming and coordination. I wonder whether, in the case of sustainability, because the two are essentially walking alongside each other, whether we can, find a different way or approach to the coordination. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. So no more comments. Well, on my side, Sadia, thank you very much for the presentation, but thank you very much for ensuring on your side this coordination and the monitoring of the appropriate coordination between the two boards. It is critical, of course, that we remain coordinated. I think it's getting more critical considering the projects, specific projects that we are both undertaking. We had a good example with the PI case, where this coordination showed to be absolutely critical to ensure not only the consistency but even the adoption and implementation of the revised the provision and what it meant for the IESB work. But there are many other examples, so this is critical. Also because for consistency reasons, for reputational reasons, because we cannot take the risk or have the risk of the two boards communicating or saying or doing things which are not compatible or which not abide by the same principles or the same lines of thoughts and etc. So this is also about the reputation of the boards. And this is also a little bit political. Together we are stronger. This is something that for me it's very clear. We will always be stronger if we are together, if we appear as a consistent body acting together, although being different. So this is critical for us. On my side, of course, it's been only 5 months, so I don't know, but trying to get closer to with Tom, and we managed to have a very good relationship and a very close one, very informal, which is very good because allows us to exchange views in the most strange situations and conditions. But like Tom being in a plane and me in a train and discussing urgent things, but this is also part of the story. But of course, the connection between the two staffs and the boards, it's very important. So thank you very much, and I would incentivate also the board members to, as possible, to get closer to the board, to the IESB board members, because the dialogue is always useful and fruitful. And if there are no other comments, we are ready for today, 3 minutes before schedule. So congratulations to the board. And nevertheless, a very substantive and a rich session. Thank you very much for this. A
couple of administrative points, Chair Diaz. One is lunch is now served in the metaverse, so please make your way there. And secondly, I'll pass the mic to Jeff for a quick announcement on the orientation session.
Thanks, Ken. Just a quick reminder to all new board members and TAs. We do have an orientation session part 2 this afternoon at 2 p.m. For those of you who are here in person with us, it will be upstairs in the green room. Otherwise, you can join us remotely. I guarantee it'll be very exciting. You'll go through all your God-given emotions, and so we'll see you upstairs at 2 p.m. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be there.